Chapter 300. As for who Qin Wanru was, Madame D didn't care and never believed that Qin Wanru might have a family background. Everything was just a coincidence. And the cause and effect of this coincidence would fall on her daughter. At that time, she could not only trample on the old beggar and the bitch Shui, but also deal with this bitch girl. Madame D didn't think it was necessary for such a possible hidden danger to exist. She was only a lowly servant girl. How could she compare to the daughter that he had pampered in the palm of his hand? She would make this bitch girl and the bitch Shui live a life worse than death. There was never a lack of new topics in the capital city. Since the incident of Wang Yishu, the news that Madame of Duke Xing adopted the daughter of a magistrate in Jiangzhou as her adopted daughter came out again, and it was very grand. It was said that Madame of Duke Xing specially asked someone to send generous gifts, many of which were exquisite. Madame of Duke Xing didn't despise Ningyuan Army General's mansion at all because she was just the daughter of a magistrate in a small place. It was said that the daughter of this magistrate still lived in Ningyuan Army General's mansion, so many people couldn't figure out whether there was kindness or resentment between Duke Xing's mansion and Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Madame of Duke Xing didn't seem to have any resentment. Instead of saying that she liked the daughter of the young magistrate, it was better to say that she wanted to save face for Ningyuan Army General's mansion. However, this generous gift only went around Qin's mansion for a while, and it was said that it was directly sent to Qi's mansion in the capital city. Some people thought that this Miss Qi might not be so generous, and didn't know why Madame of Duke Xing liked her. When she lived in Qin's mansion as a guest, Madame of Duke Xing liked her. This was indeed her lucky chance, but this lucky chance happened in Qin's mansion, which meant that without Qin's mansion, there would be no fate between her and Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing should also send this generous gift because of Qin's mansion, and even part of it should be for Qin's mansion. This Miss Qi hurriedly sent all the gifts to Qin's mansion, which seemed to be a waste of money, so many people didn't think highly of her before she officially moved into Duke Xing's mansion. Wealthy aristocratic families also had their own rules. How could it be so easy to integrate into them? Qi Rongji had already looked down on this matter even though she was also born in a wealthy aristocratic family. But Qi Rongji did not know these. She was very proud these days, so proud that she almost told the whole world about her current identity. She could finally enter Duke Xing's mansion. That day, the person sent by Duke Xing's mansion even set the date and sent a generous gift. There were so many silks and satins, which made her clothes several times more expensive. These gifts were sent to the Qi mansion before, but Qi Tianyu had already sent half of them. Some of them were gifts to thank the Qi mansion. Qi Rongji did take out these gifts and sent them to old grandma. However, she took all the beautiful brocades and made them into her own clothes. She was about to become the miss of Duke Xing's mansion. If she didn't prepare a few more clothes, how could she meet others in the future? However, she couldn't find anyone to show off even if she wore beautiful clothes every day. Qin Yuru was still grounded. It was said that Qin Wanru was sick. Jifang Pavilion was guarded tightly. Even if she wanted to break in, she couldn't. Qi Rongji felt like a pearl cast before swine. Especially today, she went to Qin Wanru's Jifang Pavilion again. For this purpose, she specially changed into another beautiful dress. These days, she didn't wear the same clothes. Each one was gorgeous and different, which could be called a fine one. However, such fine clothes didn't receive the corresponding envious eyes at the gate of Jifang Pavilion. Miss Qi, our miss is sick and can't see you. Chu Lu came out and reported to her respectfully. Although she was still a second-class servant girl, she had become Qin Yu's right-hand woman, helping her to deal with the affairs in the courtyard. She was also smart. Although she was a second-class servant girl, the servant girls in the courtyard also treated her as a principal servant. Everyone thought that it was only a matter of time for Chu Lu to become a principal servant girl. However, others thought so, but Qi Rongji didn't think so. At this moment, her face changed. She looked Chu Lu up and down, raised her head, and looked cold. Qin Wanru refuses to see me with all kinds of excuses. Is it because she doesn't dare to see me? Qi Rongji was infuriated by the fact that a second-class maid had come to speak to her. Who was she? She was about to become the Miss of Duke Xing, but she was looked down upon by Qin Wanru. Miss Qi, our miss is really sick. She has been sick since she came back from the palace. Chu Lu explained. Bitch. Qi Rongji was furious. She was about to slap Chu Lu. Chu Lu reacted quickly and dodged, while shouting, Miss Qi, our miss is really sick. Don't you believe it? When they made a ruckus, other people in the courtyard looked at Qi Rongji with unkind eyes. Seeing so many maids and old maids with brooms and rags looking at her, Qi Rongji felt inexplicably guilty and did not dare to make a fuss for a while. She gritted her teeth and snorted. I will leave Qin's mansion in a few days. Tell your miss to get well soon. Otherwise, she can't see me even if she wants to. Yes, Miss Qi. I will report to our miss later. Miss Qi, please go first. If you have nothing to do, you can help our second miss to see our first Mississippi. After a period of time, our first miss and child D may get married. At that time, it will be inconvenient for Miss Qi to see our first miss. Chu Lu said with a flattering smile, and changed the topic to Qin Yuru. I want to see her. Don't you know who Qin Yuru is? She doesn't deserve me to see her. Qi Rongji snorted coldly, turned around and walked away. Miss Qi, have a safe journey. Chu Lu bowed to her from behind. She was very courteous. Qi Rongji turned her head and looked at Chu Li's smiling face. She became more and more annoyed. Standing outside Jifang Pavilion, she looked around and decided to go to another road, which led to Qin Yuru's courtyard. She had been rejected by Qin Wanru several times in the past few days, so she didn't go to Qin Yuru's courtyard. Thinking that her current identity was not ordinary, but the Qin sisters didn't see her and didn't envy her, Qi Rongji felt uncomfortable. It was like wearing silk clothes at night. No matter what, she had to make the Qin sisters envy her. Since she was rejected by Qin Wanru, she went to see Qin Yuru. It was not convenient to disturb Qin Yuru because she was grounded. However, she was angry at Qin Wanru's door, and the evil fire in her heart was suppressed. She couldn't care less and went to Qin Yuru's courtyard with Chun Yi. She looked down on Qin Wanru because of her own identity, but she sent a second-class servant girl to answer her. Wasn't this humiliating? Miss Qi was so angry that she went to see First Miss. Chu Lu didn't leave just now, but followed Qi Rongji from a distance. She only turned back when she saw Qi Rongji turn into the path of Qin Yuru's courtyard. Make Qi Rongji go to Qin Yuru's courtyard more these days. Qin Wanru smiled and said meaningfully. Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru were both mean and vicious. Letting them fight among themselves could save her a lot of trouble. The disaster in Jingxin Monastery must have something to do with Madame D. However, Madame D was in the capital city now, and her influence was limited. In Jiangzhou, the only person who had connections with her and had the power to secretly frame Jingxin Monastery was the magistrate of Jiangzhou. The magistrate's wife, Madame Li, was not someone who was easy to deal with. Madame D must have given her conditions to make her take action. Qin Wanru didn't want to know what Madame D's conditions were. She just wanted to ask Qi Rongji for help. Take what happened to Qi Rongji as an example. Madame D could be said to have helped Qi Rongji. So what if Madame Li in Jiangzhou dealt with a small Jingxin monastery for her daughter? In the eyes of the aristocratic families in the capital city, the magistrate of Jiangzhou was nothing. However, in the eyes of the people in Jiangzhou, the magistrate was the sky above them. He couldn't be touched easily. The Jiangzhou magistrate had great power in Jiangzhou, and it was so far away from the capital city. If he wanted to harm Jingxin Monastery, he could do it with just a word. From what happened in Jingxin Monastery, it could be known that Madame D and Madame Li colluded again. Qin Wanru would never allow them to establish a solid alliance. In this life, Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru could not collude with each other to do evil. There was one thing that Madame D could not say no matter how hard she tried. When Madame of Duke Xing took a fancy to Qi Rongji, she had been locked up. That was to say, she didn't make any effort in this matter. This was enough for Qi Rongji to ridicule the conditions Madame D had given. In Qi Rongji's eyes, it was her own luck that Madame of Duke Xing took a fancy to her. It had nothing to do with Madame D and Qin Yuru. With this point, coupled with the grudges between them, everything that happened next was only logical. Duke Yong's mansion may send medicinal materials here again. Ask someone to keep an eye on them, especially on the two new servant girls. She had already made up her mind about Qi Rongji, so she didn't pay attention to her. Instead, she paid attention to another matter and ordered softly. Yes, miss, I will pay attention. Chu Lu nodded and said with a smile. Now she was in charge of keeping an eye on the two new servant girls. She was also the one who contacted Qing Shui. Qin Wanru nodded and looked out of the window. She didn't know when the heavy snow began to fall. It was not very dense, but it seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. After a while, there was a thin layer of snow on the ground. She tightened her clothes and walked to the window with her clear eyes. This was the first heavy snow she had seen since she came to the capital. Miss, do you want to enjoy the scenery? There is a pavilion that is a good place to enjoy the scenery and it is warm. Qing Yu suggested. She had been in the mansion all the time, so she was basically familiar with all the places in the mansion. Let's go and have a look. Qin Wanru agreed readily. Yu Jie brought a cloak for her. After putting it on her, she led her out with Qing Yu. It had snowed before, but it was not as heavy as this time. The snowflakes were falling and the sky was full of snow. Such a snowy scene could not be seen in Jiangzhou. Qi Rongji walked out of Qin Yuru's courtyard angrily not long after she arrived. She now hated the Qin sisters very much. One was fickle and the other was stupid and annoying. No matter how she looked at them, she didn't like them at all. She was bullied by Qin Wanru, and she was also not treated well by Qin Yuru. Not only did Qin Yuru not envy her at all, but she also ridiculed her. Chapter 301. Di Yan didn't expect to see Qi Rongji at this time, so he was overjoyed. Seeing her fall over, he looked around to make sure there was no one else and then held her in his arms. He said with a smile, Miss Qi, be careful. Di Yan hadn't seen Qi Rongji for a long time, so he was naturally happy to see her. He deliberately tightened his arms and then slowly let go of her. But the process was a little long, and anyone could see that there seemed to be some ambiguity between them. Thank you, child D. Qi Rongji blushed and took a few steps back to stand firm. Then she bowed to Di Yan to thank him. She avoided him too fast and too much, as if she was avoiding something dirty. Di Yan's face froze, but then he became gentler and said, You're welcome. Miss Qi, are you here to see my cousin at this time? Yes. Qi Rongji lowered her head and said. Although her attitude was gentle, it was very alienating. I heard that you are going to be Madame of Duke Xing. An adopted daughter? Di Yan asked with a smile on his face. It's Madame of Duke Xing's favor. Qi Rongji said in a low voice. At this point, it seemed that there was nothing to talk about. The atmosphere between them was inexplicably awkward, which was completely different from the gentle and comfortable feeling Di Yan had imagined. He didn't know what to say at the moment, but when he looked at Qi Rongji's coquettish side face, he felt a little unwilling. How have you been recently? Looking around and seeing that there was no one around, he lowered his voice and became very gentle. Thank you for your concern, child D. Qi Rongji said impatiently. She slowly raised her head with a smile on her face and said, Child D, I have something to do, so I won't disturb you to see first Miss Qin. After saying that, she bowed gracefully and then turned to leave. She quickened her pace, as if she didn't want to have a deep relationship with Di Yan. Chuni, who was behind her, looked at Di Yan and then at Qi Rongji, who had left a few steps. She bit her lip, bowed to Di Yan, and then chased after Qi Rongji. Di Yan's face darkened with anger. He kicked a small tree on the side, which shook violently. The few leaves on the tree all fell off. Bitch! Although he was not very smart, he was not hopelessly stupid. When he first arrived in the capital, Qi Rongji tried to appear in front of him and acted affectionate to him. How could he not know that Qi Rongji had feelings for him? And he actually had feelings for her at that time. It was impossible for Qi Rongji to be a concubine, but he had to marry Qin Yuru. Anyway, they had a good relationship, so he would let one of them be the principal wife and the other the secondary wife. He did not expect things to turn out this way. Now, Qi Rongji was despising him. Yes, that's right. She despised him. At first, he couldn't believe that she despised him. But now, looking at Qi Rongji's back, he understood everything. A girl from a small family actually dared to look down on him. How could the arrogant Di Yan not be angry? His face turned livid. The manservant stood behind him with his head lowered, not daring to move. Cousin, did you just find out that she's a loose woman? A somewhat sarcastic voice came from his side. Di Yan frowned. Although he did not like Qi Rongji, Qin Yuru's current behavior did not make him happy either. But thinking of his mother's order, he straightened his face and then slowly turned his head. He did not know when Qin Yuru came out of the courtyard and stood beside him. He did not know if she had seen the interaction between him and Qi Rongji just now. Did she climb up the social ladder and look down on us? Di Yan was very smart not to mention the ambiguous relationship between them just now. He only said a meaningful sentence. Yes, she climbed up the social ladder, so she looks down on Duke Yong's mansion. Qin Yuru sneered. She did not come out for a long time, but a servant girl saw the scene of Qi Rongji being hugged by Di Yan and reported to her. Then she came out in a hurry. Unexpectedly, she was still late. Qi Rongji had already left. Climbed up the social ladder with Madame of Duke Xing. I heard that she took the initiative to climb up the social ladder. Di Yan twitched the corner of his mouth. This was not a secret in Qin's mansion. It was said that Madame of Duke Xing had taken a fancy to Qin Wanru at the beginning. Later, no one knew how it fell on Qin Wanru. She is indeed a bitch. She is so eager to climb up the social ladder with Madame of Duke Xing. But even if Madame of Duke Xing has to accept her, so what? She is not the only one who has the chance to become the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Yuru sneered and turned to walk inside. She did not say hello to Di Yan. She was very proud, which made Di Yan's eyes flash with a trace of anger. After hesitating for a moment, he still smiled and followed her. Cousin, what do you mean? Di Yan took a few steps forward and caught up with Qin Yuru. He asked with a smile. I don't mean anything. I just can't bear to see that someone's kindness is regarded as ill intent. Qin Yuru glanced sideways at Di Yan and sneered. Yes, I just helped her out of kindness. I didn't expect that she could not avoid me, as if I wanted to do something to her. Di Yan said with a smile, as if he did not hear the other meaning in Qin Yuru's words. Qin Yuru glanced at Di Yan suspiciously. Cousin, she is obviously not as good as you. No matter in which aspect, why did she win the favor of Madame of Duke Xing? Di Yan said again. He said so, and he really thought so. The marriage between him and Qin Yuru had been settled. If Qin Yuru was good, he would naturally be good. Originally, he thought that Qi Rongji and he also had a mutual affection. He wanted to find a chance to meet Qi Rongji and tell her his feelings. He did not expect that Qi Rongji would turn against him. Cousin, do you also think so? Qin Yuru glanced sideways at Di Yan and asked proudly. Of course I think so. I'm going to marry my cousin, and I'm going to be one with her. When my cousin is well, I'm well. When I'm well, my cousin is naturally well too. Di Yan said with a smile. He did not have a good life recently. Wherever he went, people pointed at him and talked about him. He was so upset that he did not want to go out. Although those bad friends of the past were still around, Every time they talked about something, they would always talk about him, and every time they talked about something, Di Yan would feel embarrassed. Whether it was him or Qin Yuru, their reputation was not good now. The matter that he forced the daughter of a declining aristocratic family to commit suicide was still a heartwarming rumor, and some people even deliberately teased Di Yan about his research. Now Di Yan really hoped that Qin Yuru could build a relationship with Duke Xing's mansion. At least with the background of Duke Xing's mansion, no one would dare to look down on him. Cousin, it's the best that you think so. If I become a miss of Duke Xing's mansion, I will naturally not be indifferent to cousin like Qi Rongji. Qin Yuru showed a trace of a smile on her face, and she looked a little reserved and complacent. Madame D told her that if she also entered Duke Xing's mansion, she would be completely different from Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji was forced to admit Qin Wanru, and she had no choice at that time. Qin Wanru was unwilling, and Madame of Duke Xing had already spread the news. However, after Qi Rongji was admitted, she had been living in Qin's mansion quietly, so she knew that Madame of Duke Xing did not take her seriously at all. As for this time, Madame D also analyzed it with her. The main thing was that Duke Xing's niece framed Qin Wanru in the palace. Speaking of that, Miss Wang, who was surnamed Wang, was really strange. She unexpectedly attacked Qin Wanru inexplicably. Qin Yuru thought this was also stupid. In order to show goodwill to Qin's mansion, Madame of Duke Xing treated Qi Rongji with kindness. The reason why Qi Rongji could get better was also because of Qin's mansion. But if a miss of Qin's mansion had a good relationship with Duke Xing's mansion, she believed that Madame of Duke Xing would be more willing. Listening to Madame D's analysis and the things Madame D prepared, Qin Yuru felt that it was almost certain that she could enter Duke Xing's mansion. Previously, when she heard that Di Yan hugged Qi Rongji at the gate of the courtyard, she was so angry that her face turned livid. She even thought that if Di Yan was not a good man, she should not marry Di Yan. When she became a miss of Duke Xing's mansion, she would not be afraid that she could not marry a good man. Cousin Yu, of course I think so. My feelings for you can only be expressed by God. I've thought wrong and done wrong in the past. I won't do it again in the future. In the future, when you marry me, you won't look at other women. Qi Rongji is just good looking, how can she be compared with you? If I didn't see her about to fall just now, I wouldn't have reached out to help her because she is your good friend. Di Yan knew that his behavior just now was probably known by Qin Yuru, so he immediately coaxed her. He was always good at coaxing people, and Qin Yuru smiled happily. Originally, she did not get along with Qi Rongji, so when she heard Di Yan look down on her, she became happier. She also found Di Yan more pleasing to the eye. They entered the room one after another, and the servant girls served tea and stepped aside. Cousin, you also hope that I can get good. That's the best. My mother has a letter for you. Cousin, give it to her later, and she will understand after reading it. Qin Yuru took out a letter from her sleeve and handed it to Di Yan. She was waiting for Di Yan to take the letter out. Madame D could not directly send a letter. What is written in it? Di Yan took the letter, looked at the tightly sealed seal, and asked in surprise. Aunt will understand after reading it. In the future, when I get benefits, it will be my cousin's benefits. Qin Yuru knew what was written in Madame D's letter. Thinking that she was about to be promoted to the miss of Duke Xing's mansion, and the attention and gifts she would get were not comparable to Qi Rongji's, she could not help showing a bit of complacency on her face. Seeing Qin Yuru's expression, Di Yan intuitively felt that there was something wrong, so he hurriedly stuck his head out and said, Cousin Yu, tell me about it, so that I can be prepared. You will marry me soon, and then we will be husband and wife. It is said in books that when a husband and wife are of one heart, their sharpness can cut through gold. Di Yan smiled sweetly and looked at Qin Yuru affectionately, as if he really regarded Qin Yuru as the woman he cared about the most. Chapter 302. You won't marry me so soon. Why? Aren't you going to get married soon? Di Yan was stunned for a moment and asked anxiously. Like Qin Yuru was the best person he could marry now. Qin Huayong was no longer the Ningyuan army general who had just come to the capital city for a job report and was nothing. Di Yan was no longer the immaculate and elegant child from an aristocratic family. He and Qin Yuru were like a broken pot and a broken bowl. Neither of them despised the other because neither of them was innocent. I'm only 13 years old now. How can I marry you? Seeing Di Yan's anxious look, Qin Yuru laughed and pointed at herself with a finger. She became more and more complacent. 13 years old. She was very satisfied with this age. It was not a big deal to be unengaged at the age of 13. At this age, everyone was picky. She was originally only engaged at the age of 15, and she had a bad reputation. This made her particularly dislike being 15 years old. It was a wonderful thing to be able to return to being 13 years old. Only at the age of 13 could she be picky. If she had known that she would have such a good fortune, she would not have flattered Di Yan when she came to the capital city. When she became the miss of Duke Xing's mansion, she could have all kinds of good childs from aristocratic families. But now she could only make do with Di Yan. Thinking of this, Qin Yuru looked at Di Yan critically. She really felt that Di Yan was becoming more and more unattractive. He was much worse than Qi Tianyu. Originally, she thought that Duke Yang's mansion was rich and Di Yan was her best choice. But when she came to the capital city, she found that there were many childs from aristocratic families who were better than Di Yan. Duke Yang's mansion was not as beautiful as she had imagined. You are 13 years old. How is it possible? You are obviously 15 years old. Di Yan stared at Qin Yuru with his eyes wide open. Cousin, you remember wrong. I am 13 years old, so we can't get married. After all, I am still too young. My mother and father will keep me for 2 more years. Qin Yuru said with a smile. She blinked her beautiful eyes twice and lowered her head in a good mood. She looked shy and wanted to say something. What are you talking about? Di Yan sneered. Not only did he not understand, but he also felt that Qin Yuru was very strange. How silly she was to forget her own age. Thinking that he would marry Qin Yuru in the future, he felt that he would suffer a loss. After he married Qin Yuru, he must have a few more beautiful concubines to compensate himself. Previously, Qin's mansion had been urging him to marry Qin Yuru. How could he not know that Qin Yuru to marry him? Di Yan thought. He leaned back and crossed his arms, looking at Qin Yuru with a look, waiting for her to explain. Cousin, it's true. You've remembered wrongly. Aunt will know after reading this letter. This is good for you and for me. Qin Yuru saw Di Yan's contempt, so she immediately put on a straight face and said unhappily, in, she said. Chen, di, chin. Qin. Di, chin. Qin Chen, sure. Qin. Qin Yuru nodded and said, Cousin, what I said is true. It can't be more true. Cousin, go back first. Qin Yuru nodded. Aunt will know when she reads it. Qin Yuru said with a smile. She was in a good mood, so she didn't ask Di Yan about the matter between Qi Rongji and Di Yan. Qin Yuru was in a good mood, so she didn't ask Di Yan about the matter between Qi Rongji and Di Yan. Madame Di was full of doubts. But Qin Yuru didn't seem to want to explain it to her. She stood up and nodded. In this case, I will give the letter to my mother. Qin Yuru sent him off with a smile and said, Cousin, go ahead. Of course, the sooner, the better. Her mother had said that it had to be done quickly. The sooner it was done, the more difficult it would be for people to find out. She hadn't been in the capital for a long time, so there were not many people who knew her real age. She used to have a few good friends, but they didn't really talk about her age. The more she thought about it, the calmer she felt. She felt lucky that she didn't have any special friends in the beginning. Otherwise, it would be a big mistake. As for Duke Yong's mansion, Qin Yuru didn't think it was a problem for people like Di Yan and Countess Yong who knew about it. Her interests and Duke Yong's mansion were originally tied together. Di Yan left Qin Yuru's Yalan pavilion full of doubts. He thought about it as he walked. The more he thought about it, the stranger he felt. How could he not know Qin Yuru's age? He looked up at the snowflakes floating above his head. They were not heavy. He looked in the direction and strode forward. In a short time, there was a small snowflake on the ground. Ah! When he turned a corner, a sweet voice suddenly came from the opposite side. Di Yan frowned and inexplicably thought of Qi Rongji. He snorted coldly but didn't reach out. He saw a petite figure directly bumping into him. The woman in front of him bumped into Di Yan. Di Yan took 2 steps back and almost fell down. The letter in his sleeve fell out from the impact. The servant hurried forward and picked up the letter from the ground. He said loudly, "How dare you, servant? Don't you see our heir is here?" The servant was very sharp-eyed. He had already seen the servant girl's clothes on the opposite side. At this time, he scolded her righteously. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend the heir." The servant girl who bumped into him raised her head. Her charming face was full of immaturity and panic. At first glance, it was obvious that she was inexperienced. However, her behavior made people feel that she was delicate and pitiful. Moreover, her behavior were pure and natural. She combined her panic and charm in a very immature way, which immediately made Di Yan's eyes light up. The coldness on his face receded like the tide. "Are you new here?" Di Yan's voice became gentle. His eyes fell on the servant girl's curvaceous figure. Not only was she so outstanding, but her figure was also very good. At first glance, he couldn't help but be tempted. He had basically seen all the servant girls in this mansion, but he had never seen such an outstanding one. In particular, the appearance of the girl from a good family. She didn't look like a servant girl, but was also different from the prostitutes he had seen in the past. However, the two seemed to be compatible, which made him feel that the servant girl in front of him was from a good family who had just become a servant girl. Moreover, it was obvious at first glance that she was from a good family and her family had suddenly declined. Originally, she was from a good family. "I'm new here," the girl said in a sweet voice. Dressed in thin clothes, she seemed to be shivering, which was very pitiful. Di Yan, who had been humiliated by Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru just now, immediately felt that this was what a girl should be like. Petite and delicate, looking at him gently and admiringly. "Get up, the ground is cold." Di Yan reached out a hand and gently motioned the servant girl to hold it. The servant girl blushed shyly and reached out her trembling little hand to hold Di Yan's hand. Di Yan pulled the servant girl up from the ground with force. Because he used too much force, the servant girl fell heavily into Di Yan's arms. Hugging a soft and fragrant body, she was more intoxicating than Qi Rongji. The beautiful woman had a light fragrance and was refreshing. Di Yan felt that he couldn't help hugging her tightly. "Your Highness." The servant girl pushed him in a sweet voice. Her face was red and flustered, and she looked extremely scared. Obviously, she was a poor little beast that accidentally fell into the hunter's hands. This made the hunter even happier. After all, the servant girl was not Qi Rongji. Even if he hugged her, it didn't matter. Di Yan still didn't let go. He looked at the prey in his arms proudly and his mood became better. He didn't expect that there was such a stunner in Qin's mansion. He would find a way to get her. "Your Highness." The servant girl pushed him hard again and said in a panic, "Your Highness, first Miss will see it." At the mention of Qin Yuru, Di Yan quickly loosened his hands. He looked around and didn't find Qin Yuru. Then he breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Why do you mention my cousin? Does my cousin not allow me to get close to other women? My cousin has always been dignified and magnanimous. She won't do such a thing." "Your Highness." The servant girl was shy and wanted to say something. "What's your name?" Di Yan said softly and reached out to hold her hand, but she carefully avoided him. But Di Yan didn't care. The more she felt shy, the more interesting it was for him to tease her. "I'm Huang Rui, and I serve Madame D." Huang Rui said shyly and looked very helpless. But this style was more charming and moving than what Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji deliberately did. Everything she said and did was naturally sculpted, which made people feel that she really felt so. "She's actually my aunt's maid." Di Yan sighed and became more and more happy. If she was only Madame D's maid, it was really a good thing. It would be much more convenient for him to ask for it. The only bad thing was that he couldn't see Madame D now, otherwise he would definitely ask Madame D for it immediately. "Yes, Your Highness," Huang Rui said in a sweet voice. "You're very good, very good," Di Yan said meaningfully. He reached out to take the letter from the servant's hand, turned around and walked out. After 2 steps, he turned back and looked at Huang Rui, with a bigger smile on his face. He had made up his mind that no matter why Qin Yuru wanted to say that she was 2 years younger and postpone their marriage, it was not a big deal. But he had to express his dissatisfaction and ask the Qin's mansion to compensate him for the loss of waiting for 2 years. At that time, he could call this servant girl named Huang Rui over. Adding fragrance to a beautiful woman's sleeves and whispering in the middle of the night was no more interesting than Qin Yuru. Huang Rui didn't stand up straight until Di Yan was completely out of sight. Looking at the direction where Di Yan disappeared, she blushed and thought about it. This child Di was really tactful. No wonder all the servant girls in the mansion wanted to meet him. Although she hadn't seen Qin Huayong yet, Di Yan was younger than Ning Yuan, army general of the Qin's mansion anyway. Besides, she heard that Duke Yong's mansion was favored by the emperor. If she could follow this child Di, it would be much better than following Ning Yuan, army general. Originally, she thought that she might not necessarily meet this child Di. Unexpectedly, she met him by chance today. This was a good thing. According to Child D's words, First Miss was also easy to talk to, which was even better. Thinking about this, Huang Rui left with joy. She came to Madame D with another purpose. When Qin Yuru secretly went to see Madame D, she didn't let her serve her. She hadn't seen Qin Yuru until now. Some things were either hearsay or heard occasionally. Neither of them noticed that on the pavilion not far from them, the curtain fell silently. This is really a coincidence. Chapter 303. It had been snowing for a few days, and the ground had been covered with a thick layer of snow. Today, the sky finally cleared up. Without the coldness of winter, there were more people in the mansion. After greeting Madame Dowager, Qin Wanru didn't go back to Jifang Pavilion directly. She held a delicate hand warmer and took Yujie to walk around the yard casually. The snow on the big roads had been shoveled away, but the snow on the small roads had not been completely swept. A stout old maid was sweeping the snow. When she saw Qin Wanru coming, she hurriedly stepped aside to salute. After she left, she began to sweep the snow again. Qin Wanru walked casually and seemed to be in a good mood. She had arrived at the Chuihua gate. The old maid guarding the gate saw Qin Wanru coming from a distance and hurriedly came to salute. "What are you doing?" Qin Wanru's eyes fell on an old maid supervisor behind her. Seeing Qin Wanru notice her, the old maid came over with a smile and also saluted. "Second Miss, I am from Duke Yong's mansion." "What's the matter?" Qin Wanru looked at the long line of servant girls and old maids outside the Chuihua gate and asked. "We are sending some medicinal materials and some gifts for First Miss Qin. It's a kind gesture from our mansion." The old maid answered with a smile. Qin Wanru knew about sending medicinal materials to Madame D. Last night, Duke Yong's mansion had sent someone to tell her about it. A gift for Big Sister. Is it the betrothal gift for heir of Duke Yong and Big Sister's marriage? Didn't he send it before? Qin Wanru's voice was very low, as if she was talking to herself. She looked a little confused and slightly puzzled. The old maid hurriedly shook her hand and said, "It's not a betrothal gift, it's not a betrothal gift. First Miss Qin is still young. Madam of the mansion and the general specially want to keep her for a few more years. Madam and old madam were too impatient before. This time the gift is for first miss to enjoy. As for the betrothal gift, it's not too late to send it in 1 or 2 years. In 1 or 2 years, Qin Yuru would be 16 or 17 years old. It was absolutely late to get married at this age. How could she say it was not too late? Her butterfly-like long eyelashes fluttered twice, and a trace of darkness flashed in her watery eyes. Big sister and the heir still haven't gotten married? Of course not. How can we get married? The first miss is only 13 years old. It's not impossible for her to get married so early. But since our mansion is reluctant to let her get married, our old madam and madam want to let the first miss enjoy a few more years of family happiness." The old maid smiled smartly. Behind them, Yujie widened her eyes. Miss is only 13 years old. How could she not know? Didn't they say she was 15? When she was in Jiangzhou, although she didn't care about worldly affairs in Jingxin Monastery, she also knew the marriage of First Miss Qin, which shocked the whole Jiangzhou. It was said that First Miss Qin was just in the right age and married the eldest son of the magistrate of Jiangzhou at the age of 15. How did she become 13 years old? Big sister is 13 years old? Qin Wanru's watery eyes turned slightly. Yes, this was said by your family. This old servant really couldn't tell at first glance. But later I learned that First Miss Qi in your mansion is also 13 years old, and then I understood. The old maid said, "This gift is also a gift from our old madam and madam. We were too anxious before, and we apologize to your mansion and first miss." Although Qi Rongji was only 13 years old, at first glance, there was no difference between her and the 15-year-old Qin Yuru. There was a difference. "How many years is your heir going to wait for my big sister?" Qin Wanru said calmly. "Of course he will wait. Since our heir is engaged to the first miss of your mansion, the two families are considered to be on good terms. Of course, he will take responsibility for anything. Since your mansion wants to keep the first miss, our heir will certainly understand. Our old madam originally dotes on the first Mississippi. You sent the gifts so early in the morning. I'm afraid you met a lot of people, right?" Qin Wanru no longer insisted on the problem of Qin Yuru's age. She looked up at the long line at the Chuehua gate. Such a long line coming early in the morning would definitely attract many people's attention. Duke Yong's mansion was not far from Qin's mansion, but it was not close either. But such a large group of people coming so conspicuously, and the weather had just cleared up. She was afraid that they must have come so ostentatiously along the way. Qin Yuru was 13 years old. Qin Wanru's lips curled up slightly. It turned out that there was such a thing. No wonder Qin Yuru married so late in her previous life. It was because Qin Yuru was reported to be 1 year younger. Some things suddenly became clear. Everything was going according to the channel in her previous life. However, in her previous life, it was carried out when she was completely ignorant. In this life, she deliberately pushed it from behind. The timing and speed were all deliberately controlled by her. She raised her watery eyes and looked outside the Chuehua gate. A servant trotted over. When he saw Qin Wanru, he came up to greet her, panting. "Second miss, your servant greets you." "What's the matter?" Qin Wanru looked up and asked calmly. "The general asked you to go over." The servant stood up straight and said with a smile. "Father asked me to go over at this time?" Qin Wanru asked in surprise. She was just walking around. How did Qin Huayong know that she was now at the Chuehua gate? "Yes, the general asked you to go over now," the servant said. Qin Wanru nodded and followed the servant to the Chuehua gate. The servant hurriedly followed her. The old maid supervisor of Duke Yong's mansion retreated to the side with a smile and respectfully waited for Qin Wanru to pass by. Qin Huayong's study was not far from the Chuehua Gate. The snow on this road had been swept clean. Qin Wanru followed the servant all the way to the door of Qin Huayong's study. Standing at the door, she slightly kicked off some snow stains on her feet and then entered Qin Huayong's study. In the study, Qin Huayong was reading a file, which was so large that half of the desk was spread out. Qin Wanru slightly raised her eyes and looked at it. It seemed to be a map. Father. Wanru, sit down first. I will tell you after I finish reading. Qin Huayong waved his hand without raising his head, and his eyes still fell on the map in front of him. Qin Wanru nodded and sat aside obediently. The servant hurriedly served tea. She put the hand warmer on her knees, reached out to pick up the tea and took a sip. The faint fragrance of tea lingered between her lips and teeth. Although Qin Wanru didn't know much about tea ceremony, she couldn't help whispering, "Good, it's really good." "Wanru, you also think it's good?" Qin Huayong laughed and glanced at her sideways, and then continued to turn to the map in front of him. "Father, the tea is very good, and it seems to be new. Is there new tea at this time?" Qin Wanru lowered her head to take another sip and whispered. Qin Huayong raised his hand slightly, indicating that he would talk later. The room became quiet. Qin Wanru carefully tasted the tea, and her watery eyes turned slightly. Suddenly, she thought of the gift of Duke Yong's mansion today, and a trace of darkness flashed in her eyes. It seemed that this tea had something to do with Duke Yong's mansion. "Oh, it's here." Qin Huayong seemed to be looking for something. After searching for a while, he murmured to himself and lowered his head to carefully check a place on the map. After a while, he raised his head, picked up the tea that the servant had just brought and took a sip. His eyes narrowed comfortably, and he leaned back with a smile on his face. "This is the tea that Duke Yong's mansion just sent. If Wanru likes it, you can take half of it." "Father, I don't need it. I don't like tea, and I just said it casually." Qin Wanru refused with a smile. She knew that Qin Huayong liked tea. When she was in Jiangzhou, there were many good tea in the mansion. "Since Wanru doesn't want it, I won't give it to you." Qin Huayong didn't refuse and said with a smile. The map on the table was casually folded by him and put aside. "Wanru, did you see the people from Duke Yong's mansion?" Qin Huayong asked while cleaning him up. "Yes, I happened to meet them. They said they sent medicinal materials for Madame D and some gifts for Big Sister, but..." Qin Wanru looked very hesitant when she said this. She pinched the handkerchief in her hand a few times, and it seemed that she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "Wanru, if you have something to say, just say it." Qin Huayong seemed to be in a good mood and said with a smile. "Father, why did the people from Duke Yong's mansion say that Big Sister is 13 years old?" Qin Wanru bit her lip, tilted her head and asked like a little girl, "Big Sister is obviously 15 years old. Why did they say that she is 13 years old?" She looked innocent and childish at this moment, and her words were very straightforward, which was very suitable for her current age and didn't look abrupt. "In fact, there is nothing we can do about it." Qin Huayong sighed, leaned back, and stopped smiling. "Father, what happened?" Qin Wanru asked worriedly. "Nothing happened. You've heard the rumors about your sister, haven't you?" Qin Huayong exhaled deeply, and his expression became serious. "In fact, not only Qin Yuru, but also Madame D and even Qin Wanru. Anyway, this kind of thing was not a good thing. The things in the inner court had been spread again and again, and it had already changed its meaning. The whole Qin's mansion, Duke Yong's mansion, and even the current Duke Xing's mansion were inexplicably in the teeth of the storm. Qin Huayong didn't like this feeling very much, but he couldn't find anything even if he wanted to. He had sent a lot of people in private, but there was no useful information. "I have heard some rumors. Are they about me?" Qin Wanru bit her lip, raised her watery eyes, and looked at Qin Huayong with a pair of bright and beautiful eyes, with some expectations. Not to mention Qin Yuru, but herself. Since Qin Huayong mentioned this, she would bring up the topic that she couldn't talk about. During this period of time, the rumors about her origin had been spreading outside, but no one in her mansion talked about it. Someone must have given a gag order. But since it was a gag order, she was not ignorant. About you? Qin Huayong frowned more tightly, looked at Qin Wanru, and said hesitantly. Father, is there anything difficult to talk about? Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered, and a faint mist enshrouded her beautiful eyes. She looked at Qin Huayong with tears. Chapter 304. Good. Qin Wanru's eyes turned slightly red. Since it's good, don't listen to those gossips. Wanru, you have to remember that you will always be my daughter. Qin Huayong sighed softly and said gently. Are they all fake? Qin Wanru looked up and bit her lip. No one noticed that her deep eyes became colder. Of course they are all fake. Qin Huayong said with certainty and determination. Well, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about your sister first. I'm afraid that what happened in Jiangzhou will be spread to the capital city, so I deliberately reported that your sister is 2 years younger than you, so that it won't affect you. Most of what happened in Jiangzhou was Qin Yuru's business. Even if it was spread to the capital city, Qin Yuru was the one who made a fool of herself. Qin Wanru didn't think it would cause any harm to her. But from Qin Huayong's words, it seemed that she and Qin Yuru were worried that what happened in Jiangzhou would spread to the capital city. What she asked was not this, but Qin Huayong's answer seemed to be this, but he avoided the most important point. A chill rose from her heart, and her eyes narrowed tightly. Father, what do you mean? She looked at Qin Huayong with a puzzled face. If your sister is 2 years younger, it would be impossible for her to marry Qi Tianyu in Jiangzhou. Even if they talked about marriage, it would be impossible for them to get married. You and your sister are both daughters of Qin's mansion, and you are bound together. How could such a thing happen? Qin Huayong comforted her. This idea was very similar to what she had in the beginning, but she had implemented it at that time, and Qin Yuru was implementing it now. When she first arrived in the capital city, she wanted to attend the banquet, and the purpose was to let people see clearly that she was too young to have such an ambiguous relationship between a man and a woman. No matter who saw her at that time, they would think that the so-called relationship between a man and a woman was a joke. At that time, she was just a child who knew nothing. Now Qin Yuru also wanted to use this trick to show that she was still young when she was in Jiangzhou, and even if she was engaged, there would be no marriage or wedding. Even if there were rumors in Jiangzhou that spread to the capital, some of the words were not true. Of course, the purpose was to clear Qin Yuru's name. It sounded reasonable. Any father in Qin Huayong's position would do the same thing. So, big sister wants to be 2 years younger. Qin Wanru wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and asked curiously. Yes, as long as your elder sister is 2 years younger, everything is fake. Qin Huayong touched his forehead and said helplessly, the marriage between your big sister and Di Yan has been settled. They are cousins, and Duke Yong's mansion is willing to cooperate with them. After all, this is good for them. It's just that Di Yan has to wait for 2 more years. It doesn't matter to others. As for you, Wanru, your grandmother and mother don't want your big sister to affect you. Although his words were implicit, the meaning in his words was clear. Qin Wanru blushed, lowered her head, and pulled a corner of her handkerchief. She said in a low voice, I'll follow your orders, father. The so-called her referred to her marriage. Qin Yuru's marriage was no longer in trouble, so Qin Wanru's marriage was in trouble. Of course, Qin Huayong was trying to protect Qin Yuru, but he was also doing it for Qin Wanru. As a father, it was reasonable for him to do so. This matter had nothing to do with others, but was related to Di Yan. Now the interests of the 2 mansions were closely tied together. Duke Yong's mansion also wanted to marry a daughter-in-law with a good reputation, so it was normal for them to help Qin Yuru clear her name. Thinking of this, it seemed that this matter was reasonable. Qin Huayong also mentioned Qin Wanru's marriage, which made her, a young girl, feel embarrassed to ask further. In the future, if someone asks about your big sister's age, just say that she is 13 years old. Seeing that Qin Wanru was so obedient, Qin Huayong's face showed a trace of a smile. I'll send someone to talk to your grandmother and mother later. This kind of thing is always good for everyone. Since our mansion entered the capital city, it has been in the teeth of the storm. Speaking of this, Qin Huayong's face darkened again. After arriving in the capital city, Qin's mansion had indeed been in the teeth of the storm. Qin Huayong felt that someone wanted to deal with him, but the problem was that he found nothing after investigating, which made him confused and more cautious in his behavior. Yes, father. Qin Wanru nodded. If there is nothing else, you can go back first. I'll look at the map again. This is the map of the capital city. Qin Huayong said. Yes, father, I'll leave now. Qin Wanru stood up. Qin Huayong nodded and opened the map on the desk again. When Qin Wanru turned around, she deliberately took a look at the map again. It seemed that there were more landforms such as mountains and rivers. When she retreated to the door, there was a wind blowing outside. Even if she held the hand warmer tightly, she still felt cold all over. The winter in the capital city was really different from that in Jiangzhou. It was very cold, so cold that it almost destroyed people's hearts. Looking back at the room, Qin Huayong had at this time refocused on the map on the desk at this time. His tall and straight eyebrows were tightly frowned, and he looked very focused. It seemed that she was called over to disturb him. Since she disturbed him, why did he deliberately call her over? The location of this study was not far from Chuehua Gate. If there were servants of Duke Yong's mansion following behind at that time, they must have seen that she stopped people of Duke Yong's mansion outside the door, right? Father, was it strange? He was also very partial. It was not the kind of obvious partiality, but a kind of faintly discernible partiality. Even if he maintained a peaceful appearance on the surface, he was actually very partial. Her heart was pulled hard, and it was very painful. Even if she had already known it, she still felt very painful at this time, which made her want to cover her chest subconsciously. In her last life, when Shichi died and she was driven out of Deputy Prime Minister's mansion. Where was her father? Why didn't he appear in her memory again? It seemed that since she entered Deputy Prime Minister's mansion, this so-called father was not her father anymore, or at an earlier time. Turning her eyes back, she took a deep breath. The cold winter breath rotated in her chest, and a very cold feeling permeated her whole body. It was very cold, but also very sober. All the vain and unrealistic thoughts were slowly exhaled with the cold breath. After all, Qin Huayong was not her biological father. Or in other words, Qin Huayong could not treat her as his biological daughter after all. Not only could he not do it, but he had other ideas. Turning back, she left decisively. In this case, she did not need to care too much about it. What she cared about was her grandmother and mother. In the study, seeing Qin Wanru turn and leave, Qin Huayong raised his head again. His eyes fell on Qin Wanru's back, and there was an inexplicable sadness in his eyes. Qin Wanru was not in a hurry to go back. She continued to walk casually, and did not even directly return to Chuehua Gate. Looking at the direction she was walking, Yujie wanted to remind her that this was the outer courtyard, but seeing Qin Wanru's somewhat cold face, she silently followed her. Miss was obviously thinking about something. Anyway, the general was also in the study, and there were no guests in the mansion at this time, so it was impossible for anyone to offend Mississippi. After walking for a long time, Qin Wanru raised her head to look at the gate in front of her, and stopped. She had actually walked to the gate. Just now, she savored every word she said to Qin Huayong in her heart. Now she stopped and felt that her feet were very painful. She had actually walked across more than half of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Miss, let's go over there and have a rest, okay? There is a small flower hall with a good view over there. It used to be the place where the general received guests, but there are no guests today. Seeing Qin Wanru's appearance, Yujie knew that she was tired. Miss had walked such a long way in silence, and even she was a little tired. Okay. Qin Wanru nodded. Yujie then led the way in front of her, bypassing a path, passing through a winding corridor, and arriving in front of a small flower hall. There were 2 servant girls waiting at the door of the flower hall. Seeing Qin Wanru coming over, although they were stunned for a moment, they immediately served tea, and then retreated to the door politely. At first glance, Qin Wanru knew that they were quick-witted. Yujie walked to the side of the flower hall and opened the window. Outside the window, a red plum blossom with white snow came into view. There were also several slender green bamboos standing in the snow, looking elegant and beautiful. Qin Wanru's eyes were involuntarily attracted. This flower hall was not big, but the view outside the window was good, especially at this time. It actually made people's eyes light up. This was the flower hall of the outer courtyard. Qin Wanru had never been here, so it was a very fresh place. She walked to the window and looked out. What was more coincidental was that the position of the window was facing the door, but what attracted Qin Wanru's attention more was that a large group of people came out from inside. They were people sent by Duke Yong's mansion to send gifts. The situation was a little different from when they entered the door. The clever old maid in charge looked a little embarrassed, with snow and mud on the corner of her clothes. It seemed that she had been beaten, and the most obvious one was a red slap mark on her face. This was strange. How could the people sent by Duke Yong's mansion to send gifts be beaten in Ningyuan Army General's mansion? It seemed that not only the old maid in charge had been beaten, but also several others were embarrassed. 2 of them walked with a limp, which made people feel that they had been kicked hard, and it was a little inconvenient for them to walk. Miss, what are they doing? Yujie also saw it, and her eyes widened in surprise. I don't know. Let's see. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and looked over indifferently. The old maid in charge of Duke Yong's mansion looked very angry. When she walked to the door, she happened to meet several old maids of Qin's mansion, and they seemed to talk about something. The old maid of Duke Yong's mansion looked aggrieved and angry, and several people came over to help her. Chapter 305. A group of people blocked the door, and more people gathered around. The servants who were originally guarding the door also came in. Looking at them, their eyes lit up as they listened. It must be some incredible news. After talking for a long time at the door, the crowd dispersed. Then the supervisor of Duke Yong's mansion led a group of people to tidy up and walk to the gate. It was very eye-catching for such a group of people to be so noisy and talk as they walked out. Qin Wanru glanced at Yujie, and Yujie immediately understood. She walked to the door and told a servant girl standing at the door, "Go and ask what happened." Did something happen? Yes. A servant girl answered respectfully, trotted out, and came back to report after a while. Were they beaten by Madame D? Qin Wanru said with a strange look. I heard so. Because they came from Duke Yong's mansion and were ordered by old Madame of Duke Yong's mansion, they went to see Madame D with the excuse of sending medicinal materials, but they were beaten. The servant girl said. The servants of Duke Yong's mansion were beaten by Madame D? This situation was so weird that Yujie couldn't help showing a little surprise on her face. It was so weird. Why were they beaten? Qin Wanru's eyes flashed and she said lightly. They said that because they gave too many gifts to First Miss and Madame D gave too few, Madame D was angry and beat the supervisor, and some of them were kicked. The servant girl said cautiously. These 2 servant girls, who could serve in the flower hall outside, were naturally smart. Now they also felt something unusual and answered more cautiously. How is it possible? Would Madame D fight with the First Miss for it? Isn't Madame D's gifts First Miss's? Yujie opened her mouth in surprise and couldn't help murmuring in a low voice. Although Madame D was very vicious to her miss, she was good to First Miss, which everyone could see. Now she competed with First Miss for gifts, which was really unbelievable. Did First Miss say anything? Qin Wanru continued to ask calmly. I don't know. Just now, the people of Duke Yong's mansion didn't say anything. The servant girl shook her head. Although the people of Duke Yong's mansion had left, there were still many people talking at the gate. Everyone felt that Madame D was too abnormal. Given her current situation, shouldn't she befriend Duke Yong's mansion? Why did he beat the people of Duke Yong's mansion like this? What did he want to do? Everyone's talking about it now. There was a sharp chill in Qin Wanru's watery eyes, but she didn't show anything on her face. She continued to ask calmly. Yes, people who heard this at the gate are talking about it. They all feel very strange. Madame D has always been obedient to First Mississippi. When will she? The servant girl answered. Because it was so weird, the servant girl answered smoothly when Qin Wanru asked. But when she said this, she realized that she had made a slip of the tongue. She knelt down with a plop. This servant has overstepped her boundaries. Please forgive me, second miss. It's fine. Get up. Qin Wanru waved her hand and looked at the gate. Although there were not many people, there were still a lot of people talking in twos and threes. The corners of her lips were slightly bent, and they talked one after another. She was not slow. After asking the servant girl to leave, Qin Wanru took a short rest and went to the inner courtyard. She returned along the original road. When she walked to the gate of Qin Huayong's study, she saw Huang Rui and the servant girl named Hongye waiting outside the gate. She couldn't help frowning slightly. The servant at the gate of the courtyard saw Qin Wanru coming and hurriedly came over to salute. What's the matter with them? Qin Wanru turned her eyes to Huang Rui and Hongye and asked lightly. They said that they counted the medicinal materials and wanted to show the list of medicinal materials to the general. The servant pursed his lips and reported. For such a trivial matter, you can report it to the supervisor of the inner courtyard. There is no need to bother father. Qin Wanru's eyes swept over Huang Rui's face. Huang Rui looked a little timid and timidly stepped back. There was no flirtatious look on her face as she had seen that day. It could be seen that the flirtatious look also varied from person to person. I also said so, but they are stubborn. They said that the supervisor old maid of Duke Yong's mansion said it, and the general must have a look at it. But the general has no time to look at such a trifle at this time. The manservant answered cleverly. What list? Give it to me. Qin Wanru reached out and said. The two servant girls hesitated and looked at each other. Huang Rui braced herself to take a step forward and said, Second miss, the medicinal materials sent by Duke Yong's mansion, Madame's idea is to let the general have a look. Madame's idea? Madame just beat the supervisor of Duke Yong's mansion. What does it mean? Qin Wanru glanced at Huang Rui's beautiful face and asked. This, I don't know. I am counting. Huang Rui lowered her head and said. Is Madame going to argue with Big Sister? Or do you want to argue with Duke Yong's mansion? Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes and asked. This. I don't know. Huang Rui did not dare to answer this question. She braced herself to pretend that she didn't understand anything. Since you don't know anything, why do you come to report at this time? Is it Madame D's idea again? Madame D made such a scene today. Is it possible that she asked you to come to report to father in this way? Qin Wanru's face became cold, and her eyes were filled with deep darkness. The two servant girls could not stand still. After looking at each other, they were about to kneel down and ask for forgiveness, but Qin Wanru waved her hand to stop them. You go back first. I will bring the list to my mother. It is better for my mother to deal with this kind of thing. She will ask the two concubines to come and count in person. The concubines in the mansion are not comparable to your little servant girls. Qin Wanru said lightly. Yujia came over and snatched a list from Huang Rui's hand. After giving her a cold snort, she stood behind Qin Wanru. Of course, she meant to take charge of it by force. Even if Madame D was unwilling, so what? Now it was Shui Rulan who was in charge of the mansion. Huang Rui was so aggrieved that her tears were about to fall down. However, Qin Wanru did not seem to have any compassion for the fairer sex. She could only bite her lips and said, "Everything is at your command, second miss. In the future, you don't have to directly bring this kind of list to father. Father is very busy and has no time to deal with this kind of inner courtyard affairs. He will not see you." Qin Wanru said coldly. "Yes, second miss." Huang Rui had to lower her head, but she was unwilling to give up and added, "Second miss, next time I will not bring this list to the general. But since this list has been sent here, can you please ask the general to have a look? Father will not see it." Qin Wanru said with a cold smile. "But..." Huang Rui still wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Yujia sharply. "No buts. You are here to serve Madame D. What do you mean by always running to the outer courtyard? Could it be that he wanted to do something else while Madame D was still injured? If so, according to the rules of Qin's mansion, you will be beaten to death." The two servant girls were so scared that their faces turned pale, and their lips trembled. They hurriedly cried, "Second miss, we don't have improper ideas." "Since you don't have improper ideas, why don't you go?" Yujia said with a disgusted face. The two servant girls did not dare to say more this time. After bowing to Qin Wanru, they hurriedly went out. "Do you want to report them to father?" After the two servant girls walked away, Qin Wanru looked at the servant with a faint smile. The servant took a deep breath of relief and hurriedly shook his head. "Second miss, it is great that you can send them away. No matter what I said just now, they would not leave. If they still stay here and the general asks, I will be implicated." "That's good. In this case, I will not disturb father," Qin Wanru said with a smile. "Second miss, please go ahead." The servant stepped aside and made way for Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru went to the Chuehua gate from the study. It was very quiet at the Chuehua gate. Only Huang Rui and Hongya, two servant girls, seemed to be asking the old maid in charge of the gate about something. Seeing Qin Wanru coming with Yujia from a distance, the two servant girls left in a hurry, like mice seeing a cat. Qin Wanru did not care and returned to her Zhifang pavilion. In the next few days, the mansion was very busy. It was close to the end of the year, and Qin's mansion had just arrived in the capital city. Shui Rulan would still deal with some necessary affairs such as welcoming guests among Qin Huayong's colleagues, but most of the power was delegated to the two concubines, who were quite capable. Madame Dowager's health was getting better day by day. What made her most happy was that Shui Rulan also got the honorary title. Although the rank was not high, if Madame D did not come out, there must be an honorary title in Qin's mansion to welcome guests. Otherwise, it would be rude to others. The day when Madame of Duke Xing officially recognized her daughter was on the night before the Little New Year's Eve. Qin's mansion was an important VIP. Not only Shui Rulan would attend, but Madame Dowager would also attend. As for Madame D, of course, she continued to be grounded with the excuse of recuperation. Qin Yuru had been released now. Her attitude was much gentler than before, and she occasionally came to Qin Wanru's courtyard to sit. It seemed that she had really figured it out after being locked up this time. Duke Xing's mansion held a big banquet for guests. Qi Rongji had packed up her things and officially moved into Duke Xing's mansion the night before yesterday. She was only waiting for the official recognition of her daughter, and Madame of Duke Xing would take her to meet all the relatives and friends. No one knew that on the night when Qi Rongji left Qin's mansion, she had secretly come to see Qin Wanru. Of course, the cause of this was Qin Wanru's words. Qin Wanru's words made Qi Rongji unable to sit still. She came to see Qin Wanru that night, and then left secretly. Other people in Qin's mansion did not know this. On the day before the little New Year's Eve, Madame Dowager's place was already very lively early in the morning. Not only Madame Dowager was there, but Shui Rulin and Qin Yuru were also there. When Qin Wanru came over, she found that all the guests had already arrived, so she hurriedly came over to greet and express her apology. Fortunately, everyone was in a good mood, and even Qin Yuru also teased her for a while. Then they got on the carriage at the gate together. Madame Dowager and Shui Rulin were in one carriage, and Qin Wanru and Qin Yuru were in the other. After everyone got on the carriage slowly turned out of the sight of Ningyuan Army General's mansion and turned to the nearest road to Duke Xing's mansion. In the carriage, Qin Yuru smiled, and it could be seen that she was in a good mood. She leaned to Qin Wanru quite intimately, reached out to take out a handkerchief, and whispered, "Wanru, let me show you the handkerchief I embroidered." Chapter 306. The handkerchief was well embroidered, and there was a beautiful cluster of orchids with two lifelike butterflies flying side by side. The color scheme was beautiful, and so was the design. Very beautiful. Qin Wanru stared at the handkerchief, as if she didn't see Qin Yuru carefully shrink her wrist with the blue mark, and then covered it with the cuff. "Second sister, do you still use this handkerchief?" Qin Yuru said with a smile, "This is one of the handkerchiefs I gave to you last time." "I am using it," Qin Wanru said lightly. Although her tone was a little light, there was a smile on her face, which showed that she really thought it was good. "Is that the one you are using now?" Qin Yuru asked with a smile, and her attitude was gentle. After saying that, she reached out to hold Qin Wanru's hand, only to see that the handkerchief in Qin Wanru's hand was made of the same material as hers, and she smiled more brightly. "Second sister, show me what you embroidered." "Nothing special, just a cluster of bamboo." Being pulled by her, Qin Wanru couldn't hide it anymore, and she unfolded the handkerchief in her hand. Sure enough, it was a cluster of very simple green bamboo, which looked very elegant. "Is this embroidered by second sister?" "Second sister, your embroidery is really beautiful." Qin Yuru praised, as if she really thought that Qin Wanru's embroidery was excellent. In fact, Qin Wanru was not very proficient in embroidery, and she could only embroider some ordinary embroidery. In her previous life, she was only good at drawing and liked drawing, and could only be said to be ordinary for women's embroidery. This handkerchief, which even Qin Wanru herself didn't think was outstanding, somehow attracted so much praise from Qin Yuru, and she even said that she wanted to exchange a handkerchief with Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru directly shook her head and refused, and her eyes fell on Qin Yuru calmly. Qin Yuru looked a little different today, as if she was listless, or trying hard to be energetic. Even though she praised Qin Wanru, she rubbed her eyebrows from time to time, and her face looked a little pale. "Big sister, are you not feeling well?" Qin Wanru calmly took back the handkerchief, and glanced at Qin Yuru's obviously pale face. Yujie tilted her head and peeked at Qin Yuru's face. Then she looked at her Mrs. face. Compared with Qin Yuru, her Mrs. face was much better. Originally, Qin Wanru's lips were very bright, and her red lips made her look brighter. At this time, compared with Qin Yuru looked haggard. Like Qin Wanru, Yujie's first thought was, what does First Miss want to do? She remembered seeing eldest young Miss yesterday. At that time, her face was not so pale and haggard. Why did eldest young Miss seem to have changed into a different person in just a day? "I'm fine, just a little tired." Qin Yuru reached out to rub the space between her eyebrows. She lowered her head helplessly and said, "I went to see my mother last night. She is not well." "Madame D is not very good?" Qin Wanru asked in surprise. "Yes, not so good. My body isn't so good, and my mood isn't so good either." Qin Yuru forced a smile and leaned against the carriage. She closed her eyes and looked like she didn't want to say anything. Seeing that she closed her eyes tightly, Qin Wanru's watery eyes flashed a trace of deepness, and she didn't ask any more. The words, "not so good," were very particular. But since Qin Yuru didn't say it, she certainly didn't ask. It became quiet in the carriage, and they went all the way to Duke Xing's mansion. The banquet of Duke Xing's mansion today was very grand, and it could be seen that they really cared about this matter. When the carriage of Qin's mansion arrived at the gate of Duke Xing's mansion, someone had already recognized their carriage. Immediately, a special supervisor old maid came to lead the way for them and led them to a parking place. After getting off the carriage, the supervisor old maid hurriedly came forward to salute Madame Dowager, and then showed the way, leading everyone to the backyard respectfully. In fact, this was the second time that Qin Wanru came to Duke Xing's mansion, but her mood was different. She rolled her watery eyes and followed Madame Dowager to walk slowly inside. There were already many people sitting in the flower hall. Madame of Duke Xing was entertaining the guests with a smile, and her behavior was natural and unrestrained. Seeing the people of Qin's mansion coming over, Madame of Duke Xing stood up and walked to the door to greet them, causing everyone to look at Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan. They were all wondering which mansion they came from, and how could Madame of Duke Xing think so highly of them. Madame Dowager, I didn't teach Yishu well. Seeing Madame Dowager, Madame of Duke Xing looked ashamed. Madame Dowager, you are too polite. It's not your fault. Madame Dowager smiled and said politely. Qin Wanru and Shui Rulan bowed sideways to Madame of Duke Xing, and then stood beside Madame Dowager. How can it not be my fault? If I hadn't thought that Ishu had no companion in the palace, I wouldn't have asked her to go to 2nd Mississippi. I didn't expect that she would. If she hadn't been so sick that she couldn't get up now, I would have asked her to explain it to 2nd Miss Qin in person and ask for 2nd Miss Qin's forgiveness in person. Madame of Duke Xing sighed, moved sideways to make way for Madame of Duke Xing, and said. She frankly and directly mentioned Wang Yishu's matter, without any intention of shirking the responsibility. Qin Wanru rolled her watery eyes, and her eyes became a little darker. Madame of Duke Xing was really shrewd. She said it so frankly in front of everyone, which showed that she was extremely innocent and was not afraid of being criticized. Now she put the blame on Wang Yishu, but Wang Yishu was so sick that she couldn't get up now. How could anyone blame a sick person? Even if there was a doubt, it should be about Wang Yishu. Hearing Madame of Duke Xing's words, everyone would only think whether Wang Yishu met someone in the imperial palace or listened to someone's words and deliberately framed Qin Wanru. However, it had nothing to do with Madame of Duke Xing. With just a few simple words, Madame of Duke Xing cleared more than half of the suspicion on herself. Madame of Duke Xing, I will sit here. Madame Dowager took a few steps, looked at the seat beside her, and said to Madame of Duke Xing with a smile. How can I do that? Madame Dowager is an elder. How can you sit so far away? Madame of Duke Xing waved her hand and said. I am not the official elder of 1st Miss Qi, and I am here today to be a witness. Madam, please don't be so polite. Madame Dowager was unwilling to sit beside Madame of Duke Xing, because that circle was for madams from noble aristocratic families. With Qin Huayong's identity, it was impossible for him to sit close to such madams. I can't do that. Madame Dowager, I really feel sorry for what you said. Although Rongji is the daughter of Qi's mansion, she came to the capital city this time and lived in your mansion. How can she not be an elder? Madame Dowager, please take a seat. Madame of Duke Xing said reluctantly. She kept leading Madame Dowager to the center. Madame Dowager's polite and affectionate manner attracted some madams and misses who didn't know the people of Qin's mansion, and they all paid attention to Qin's mansion. Seeing that Madame of Duke Xing was so polite and refused to go back until she took a seat, Madame Dowager had no choice but to take a few more seats, but then she didn't move forward. Madame Dowager found that the seats of Qin's mansion were very close to her middle seat, so she didn't give way anymore and returned to her seat with a smile. Madame Dowager sat in the seat in front, Shui Rulan sat beside her, and Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru sat behind them. Seeing that Madame of Duke Xing praised the people of Qin's mansion so much, some people around talked to old Madame Qin and Shui Rulan with a smile. However, several misses behind these madams looked up and down at the two misses of Qin's mansion with a bit of disdain, and several misses near them also ignored them. The misses of Qin's mansion didn't have a good reputation. Although there were no bad rumors about Qin Wanru, it was said that she was just a child picked up. Such an identity really made those misses who thought that they were noble dislike her. As for Qin Yuru, a lot of things had happened to her. With the spread of some rumors, her current reputation could be said to be extremely bad. She even forced Di Yan's confidant to commit suicide. On the surface, people would think that she was not magnanimous enough and was also vicious. Moreover, there were rumors that she was fickle, and whoever talked to her for a few more words would be stained with something. Several misses near her even directly pulled their chairs to the side and stayed away from her. The handkerchief in Qin Yuru's hand was fiercely pulled a few times. She secretly gritted her teeth and glanced at Shui Rulan's back with hatred. She thought that the cause of these things was Shui Rulan and Qin Wanru. Originally, she had temporarily suppressed this anger, but at this time, she was so ignored by other misses that she couldn't bear it for a while. In the flower hall, the madams were talking animatedly, but some young madams seemed to be bored. Some young madams couldn't sit still and walked out in twos and threes with a few young madams they were familiar with. It was still early, and the young madams felt bored sitting like this. Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru had been sitting quietly behind Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan. If someone looked at them, they would smile slightly, looking quiet and peaceful. Many people were very curious about them, and from time to time, their eyes fell on them. This pair of sisters was now the two most talked about in the capital city. First, Miss Qin, are you ill? Finally, a madam in her 30s next to Shui Rulan looked at Qin Yuru and asked with a smile. Shui Rulan looked back at Qin Yuru and asked softly, Yuru, are you not feeling well? I'm fine. Qin Yuru smiled and shook her head with a pale face, but everyone could see that she was struggling. Compared with Qin Wanru on the other side, her complexion was too obvious. Do you want to take a walk outside with your sister? Madame Dowager also turned her head, looked at Qin Yuru's face, and whispered with concern. Grandma, I don't want to go out. I'll sit here. Qin Yuru shook her head and forced a smile, which made her look more and more stiff. But she kept saying that she was not feeling uncomfortable, so Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan couldn't say anything. Madame Dowager only whispered to her, if you feel uncomfortable, tell me, don't bear it. Yes, Grandma. Qin Yuru said respectfully. Qin Wanru glanced at Qin Yuru calmly. She could be sure that Qin Yuru must have something, but she didn't know what it was. It seemed that Qin Yuru wanted something big since she was willing to make such a wound on her hand. Chapter 307. Are you the two misses of Qin's mansion? The servant girl came over and asked Qin Wanru in a low voice. What's the matter? Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the servant girl whom she did not know. I'm the servant girl who serves Miss Qi. Our miss invites you to go over and says that she has something to discuss. The servant girl said in a low voice. First Miss Qi. Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Yes, our miss. The servant girl nodded and pointed outside. Our miss is waiting for you now. At this time. Qin Wanru looked at Madame of Duke Xing, who was sitting in the upper seat. She saw that the other madams were talking enthusiastically and did not notice them. Yes, at this time. Our miss will come out to meet the guests later. She may not have time. The servant girl explained. Big sister, shall we go out together? Qin Wanru whispered to Qin Yuru, who was the only one who paid attention to her. Second sister, I'm not in good health, so I won't go, Qin Yuru said tiredly. She reached out and rubbed her eyebrows again, looking like she was struggling. Indeed, she did look listless. Then I'll go and have a look. Qin Wanru said. Okay, second miss, please follow me. The servant girl smiled and led the way in front of her. Second sister, you go. I'll talk to Grandma. Qin Yuru saw Qin Wanru looking at Madame Dowager who was talking to others, so she said. Then I'll bother you, big sister. Qin Wanru nodded and followed the servant girl with Yujie. Out of the door of the flower hall, the servant girl led Qin Wanru to an oblique path. Yujie took 2 steps forward and gently pulled Qin Wanru's sleeves. Qin Wanru calmly blinked at her, and Yujie had already understood her meaning. There were many guests today. Along the way, she saw Mrs. and young madams sitting or standing together and talking from time to time. But then the path became more and more remote. Looking at the road in front of her, Qin Wanru stopped her footsteps. Where are we going from here? To our Miss's yard. Our Miss lives in a remote place now. The servant girl seemed to know what Qin Wanru would ask and answered with a smile. Miss Chi lives in such a remote place. Isn't she the most lively person? Why do you live in such a remote place? Yujie asked, puzzled. This is arranged by Madam. Madam wants our Miss to live in a quiet place. She also wants to teach our Miss the rules of the capital city. She said that our Miss didn't learn well in Jiangzhou. Living in a remote place will be quieter, and Miss will not be distracted. The maid explained. It meant that Madam of Duke Xing still wanted to teach Qi Rongji the rules. Before she learned the rules well, she didn't want her to meet too many people. In this direction, is it close to the outer court? Qin Wanru didn't move her feet and looked at the layers of pavilions in the distance. Second Miss, you are wrong. How could it be near the outer court? The servant girl did not expect Qin Wanru to have such a good sense of direction, so she hurriedly answered to cover it up. Isn't that the pavilion in the outer court? Qin Wanru pointed to a pavilion and said. In fact, she didn't know the direction. She just felt that the building was taller, so she tricked the servant girl. Second Miss Qin, you are mistaken. This is the courtyard of the inner courtyard of our mansion. Because old Madam likes to enjoy the scenery, she specially built such a place. The servant girl said. Qin Wanru reached out to touch her head. Yujie hurriedly reached out to hold her and said, I'm tired. Let's take a rest and then go. Second Miss Qin, can you take a rest in the front? It's not far away. Our Miss is still waiting for you. The servant girl did not expect Qin Wanru to stop at this time, so she became anxious. Our Miss is not feeling well today. She can't walk anymore. Yujie held Qin Wanru and looked around, as if she wanted to find a place to rest. Yes, second Miss Qin, there is no place to rest here. Can you take a few more steps? The courtyard where our Miss lives is not far away. You can have a rest there. Seeing Qin Wanru's face was not very good, the servant girl did not dare to urge her anymore and had to say with a smile. Miss, let's go back to have a rest. Yujie ignored the servant girl and suggested to Qin Wanru in a low voice. The servant girl became anxious and looked around. Well, I am not feeling well now. Go back and tell your Miss that I will come to her next time when I have a chance. Qin Wanru reached out to touch her forehead and said softly. After saying that, she held Yujie's hand and was about to leave. The servant girl was anxious and reached out to hold Qin Wanru. Second Miss Qin, you can't go. Why can't I go? Can the rules of your Duke Xing's mansion stop guests in this way? Qin Wanru sneered and said. She did not believe that Qi Rongji would come to her at all. When she was in the mansion, she told Qi Rongji a few words. Qi Rongji would not come to her at this time, and it seemed that she had to come to her. Second Miss Qin, I don't want to stop you. I'm afraid that our Miss has been waiting for you and is anxious. There are only a few steps ahead. Second Miss Qin, you just need to take a few steps to get there. If you go back, it will be a long distance. I'm afraid that you can't rest for a while. The servant girl panicked, put down her hand, and begged to explain. I originally wanted to see Miss Qi, but I suddenly don't want to when I see the rules of your mansion. Qin Wanru said coldly, turned around and left with Yujie's hand. This willful and unreasonable look made the servant girl's face change greatly. She had seen that kind of suspicious miss, but no matter how suspicious and unwilling she was, she had to at least pretend to be polite. What's more, Qi Rongji's status was much higher than Qin Wanru's now. Even if they were not very harmonious before, they had to maintain the friendship on the surface. This would only be good for Qin's mansion, and there would be no harm. Unexpectedly, Qin Wanru wanted to go back in this way, and the reason she used was really unbelievable. Her previous behavior was more like teasing people. The servant girl's face alternated between blue and white. She looked back anxiously. Suddenly, when she saw a man coming, she heaved a sigh of relief. Her eyes were full of smiles. He had finally arrived. "Second Miss Qin, please wait." The man's voice came from behind. Qin Wanru was stunned for a moment, and then slowly turned around. Her eyes fell on the face of Wang Xingxue, who came in a hurry, with a faint smile on her lips. Extremely cold. Sure enough, he was waiting for her here. Yujie took 2 steps forward, stood in front of Qin Wanru, and looked at Wang Xingxue with vigilance. Seeing the vigilance on their faces, Wang Xingxue stood still politely. "Second Miss Qin, I'm Wang Yishu's brother. I want to talk to you about my sister." After he finished speaking, he raised his eyes and looked at Qin Wanru. Immediately, his eyes showed amazement. He did not expect Qin Wanru to be so outstanding. Her delicate little face was like a jade carving, her dark watery eyes, and her red lips made people feel that flowers were in full bloom in the winter weather. "Child Wang, what else does your sister want?" Qin Wanru raised her eyes and looked at Wang Xingxue calmly with cold eyes. Child Wang, Child Wang." Seeing that Wang Xingxue looked at Qin Wanru in a daze and even forgot to speak, the servant girl hurriedly shouted a few times. "Ah, oh." Wang Xingxue finally came to his senses. When he saw Qin Wanru's face clearly, he felt reluctant at first. His heart immediately became willing, and he even felt a kind of warmth. Such a little beauty, even if she hadn't grown up yet, she was still one of the top beauties. How beautiful would she be in the future? "Second Miss Qin, can you come over and have a seat? I'll tell you what happened in the palace that day. Although it was my sister who did it, there was another reason. If it weren't for this reason, how could my sister make things difficult for you?" Wang Xingxue pretended to be gentle and reached out his hand forward with excellent etiquette. "Second Miss Qin, can you come over and have a seat?" After this road, there was a garden, which meant that he was in this garden just now. That was to say, this was the destination that the servant girl mentioned before. "Child Wang, if you have something to say, please say it here." Qin Wanru said lightly and turned her watery eyes to the opposite side. Coincidentally, there was a lake that was not there. However, in winter, the lakeside was even colder, and no one was seen, which made this place even more deserted. Wang Xingxue seemed to want to tell the truth of what happened in the palace, which was now only known by Wang Yishu. Anyone who encountered this kind of thing would want to find out the answer. Wang Xingxue's words caught everyone's mind. With this sentence, many people would go to find out the truth. But Qin Wanru was not one of them. She knew clearly why Wang Yishu wanted to harm her, so she didn't need to prove anything. "Here. It's too windy and cold here. It's not a place to talk." Wang Xingxue turned to the side and said helplessly. He pointed to a fake stone in front of the garden and said, "Second Miss Qin, let's go there to talk. It's windy there, so it can be a place to talk." His words were very polite, and Wang Xingxue's behavior was also very well behaved. "No, I have nothing to say to Child Wang." Qin Wanru refused coldly. Instead of moving forward, she took a step back. Yujie looked at Wang Xingxue and became more alert. "Second Miss Qin, don't you want to know the truth?" Wang Xingxue frowned and asked in disbelief. At this time, shouldn't she immediately ask about the situation in the palace at that time? Why Qin Wanru in front of him was different from what he imagined. "I don't want to know." Qin Wanru turned around decisively. "Second Miss Qin, please wait a minute." Seeing that she was really going to leave, Wang Xingxue hurriedly came over to stop her, but was stopped by Yujie. Qin Wanru staggered a few steps and seemed to fall, but immediately stood up with the help of a tree on one side. "Miss, be careful." Yujie screamed, looked at Wang Xingxue, and immediately turned back to help Qin Wanru. The two of them took a few steps back and were about to leave. Wang Xingxue hurriedly chased her a few steps forward, but Yujie stopped him. Qin Wanru took a few steps back, turned around, picked up the corner of her dress, and ran out in a hurry. Wang Xingxue still wanted to chase her. Unexpectedly, Yujie not only stopped him, but also took a few steps forward and pushed him hard. Wang Xingxue was pushed back and fell heavily to the ground. Chapter 308. There was a lake in Duke Xing's mansion, where lotus flowers were planted in summer. It was a good time to enjoy the lotus leaves, so there were several pavilions for viewing on the lake. Today is not a day for fun. When it was time for the flowers to bloom, there were many people in the pavilion. They were all misses and childs from aristocratic families who came to Duke Xing's mansion today. This place was close to the outer courtyard, so several childs came to the lake to wander and met their sisters and familiar misses from aristocratic families, so a large group of people went to this pavilion. The pavilion was warm, and there were no elders around. Most of them knew each other, so it was easy and natural for them to chat and laugh. No one knew who first found Qin Wanru on the opposite side and made a slight sound of surprise, which attracted everyone's attention. What was more coincidental was that Wang Xingxue actually came out at this time. He was far away, so people couldn't hear what they were talking about, but judging from their looks, they felt that there was something between them. Someone whispered, and immediately many people gathered around the window, looking at the scene across the lake with great interest. This kind of thing actually happened in front of their eyes. Anyone would find it hilarious. A tryst between a man and a woman was actually caught red-handed. Everyone had only heard of this kind of thing, but no young lady from an aristocratic family had ever seen it. More and more people came to watch. Some people were guessing who they were as they watched. They were too far away to recognize who they were. While they were guessing, someone suddenly exclaimed, "By the way, this is the second miss of Ningyuan Army General's mansion." Ningyuan Army General's mansion? Who's that? Someone asked in surprise, not knowing which family Ningyuan Army General's mansion was. It's the famous Ningyuan Army General's mansion, which is related to Duke Yong's mansion by marriage. Someone implicitly pointed at Di Fenglan, who was talking to someone. As soon as he said that, everyone immediately knew who it was. It was said that the two young ladies of Ningyuan Army General's mansion, who had been in a lot of trouble recently, were not good people. Now it seemed that it was true. They even had a tryst with a man when attending a banquet. "Miss D, come and have a look. Do you know the young lady over there?" Someone called Di Fenglan over with a smile. Hearing someone calling, Di Fenglan walked over slowly and glanced at the opposite bank. She couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. "How is it? Do you know him?" A young lady noticed that something was amiss and came over to ask. "It's Qin Wanru," Di Fenglan said with certainty, with some disdain in her eyes. "What is she doing here?" "I don't know that man." "When did you get to know another man?" The latter part of her words was a little low, almost as if she was talking to herself. But even so, everyone heard it clearly. After looking at each other, another miss asked with some inquiry, "Miss D, do you mean that the second Miss Qin is not so good?" "I did not say that." Di Fenglan denied flatly and looked at the other side of the lake with some contempt. "Who is that man? Why did you meet Qin Wanru privately in the inner courtyard?" Her words sounded like a denial, but her subsequent question determined the nature of Qin Wanru's affair. The so-called meeting in private, of course, meant that her reputation would be ruined. With so many misses and childs as witnesses, if Qin Wanru did not marry this man, she would only have the altar lamp and the ancient Buddha. This seems to be Wang Xingxue, the nephew of Duke Xing. A young child who was familiar with Wang Xingxue was not afraid of making things worse, so he immediately answered Di Fenglan's question. Wang Xingxue. Is he Wang Yishu's elder brother? Could it be true that what Wang Yishu said in the palace is true? The second miss of Qin's mansion really has a close relationship with Wang Yishu's elder brother. A miss connected the dots in surprise. No way. If it is true, Miss Wang is really wronged. In the past few days, everyone secretly discussed this matter the most. No one could understand why Wang Yishu inexplicably attacked Qin Wanru, who she met for the first time. Was this something that a normal person would do? However, after this matter, Wang Yishu was so sick that she could not get out of bed. It was said that it was difficult for her to even speak now, so no one knew the truth until now. But if Qin Wanru was really familiar with Wang Xingxue, then Wang Yishu was probably wronged. No wonder Wang Xingxue was sneaky just now. It turns out that he secretly met a beauty. A child teased. Yes, I also saw him take a handkerchief from the servant girl and then leave in a hurry. Another child echoed. In this way, it was true. Although everyone felt that they did not hear it with their own ears, it was irrefutable evidence. It seems that it is related. Di Fenglan sneered, glanced out of the window, and concluded again with a sneer. Everyone burst into laughter, looked out of the window, and continued to watch the fun. Everyone suddenly saw that the scene across the lake changed. Qin Wanru seemed to be leaving. Wang Xingxue wanted to stop her, but was stopped by the servant girl. Then Qin Wanru turned to run. Wang Xingxue still wanted to chase her, but was pushed down by the tough servant girl. What happened next shocked everyone even more. The second Miss Qin, who looked petite and thin, actually went over and kicked Wang Xingxue hard, and then ran away with the servant girl in a hurry. After running a few steps, the servant girl shouted. A lot of passing servant girls and old maids came over, and the servant girl pointed at Wang Xingxue, who just got up, and said something angrily. It was a little noisy, and there were more and more onlookers. What happened? What happened? A nosy child couldn't help but run downstairs with his servant. A few of the young ladies looked at each other and followed him downstairs. Thinking of the way Wang Xingxue suddenly ran out when Qin Wanru came over and what he did next, it didn't seem that there was an affair between them. Could it be that they had a new grudge against each other because of Wang Yishu, so they quarreled with each other? Everyone guessed and went downstairs one by one. Di Fenglan looked at the crowd across the lake, and then at those childs and young madams who left one by one. For a moment, she stamped her feet angrily and hatefully. Qin Wanru escaped again. This bitch was really lucky. Across the lake, Qin Wanru stood behind Yujie, watching Yujie testify that Wang Xingxue had bad intentions. Wang Xingxue had already stood up. Seeing more and more people, he was a little flustered, but he was a man, so he reacted quickly. After hearing Yujie's words, he asked Qin Wanru in surprise, "Second Miss Qin, why did your servant girl put the blame on me? Didn't you ask someone to call me here?" As soon as he said this, everyone present looked at Qin Wanru suspiciously. If it was only Wang Xingxue's words, everyone actually didn't believe much. However, with the inexplicable entanglement between Wang Yishu and Qin Wanru in the palace, Wang Xingxue's words seemed to be able to explain the reason for Wang Yishu's hostility to Qin Wanru. "Child Wang, you are the same as your sister. It's the first time you meet me, but you say something specious." Although Qin Wanru stood behind Yujie, she was thin, but her momentum was very calm. She looked at Wang Xingxue calmly, as if she was looking at a clown, with a cold smile on her lips. After looking Wang Xingxue up and down with her watery eyes, she said, "Child Wang, you asked someone to trick me here and said that you would tell the truth that your sister framed me, but it turns out that you want to frame me again. I don't know how I offended Child Wang and his sister, so that you won't let me go again and again. Do you want to ruin my reputation? Second Miss Qin, how can you say that? If it weren't for your appointment, how could I come in at this time? If you don't believe it, you can ask someone to ask." At that time, many people saw me take the handkerchief. Wang Xingxue angrily took out a handkerchief from his arms and waved it in his hand. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the handkerchief. The white handkerchief was indeed very beautiful, but it was not the one in Qin Wanru's hand before. It turned out that there had been follow-up measures for this matter, and the person who planned it was really thoughtful. Child Wang, how can you be sure that this handkerchief is mine? Qin Wanru said unhurriedly, slightly narrowing her watery eyes. The servant girl who sent the handkerchief said that it was yours, so I came here. If it was someone else's, how could I come here? Wang Xingxue deliberately led everyone's speculation in the direction of misunderstanding. His words made people feel that there was something wrong between them. A servant said it was. Child Wang is really gullible. Qin Wanru's face darkened, and then she said coldly, Child Wang, can you prove that this handkerchief is mine? How can you prove that this handkerchief is not yours, second Miss Qin? Wang Xingxue seemed to be in a hurry and retorted. After reaching out to wave the handkerchief in his hand, he looked at Qin Wanru and said, if second Miss Qin is not guilty, let everyone see the handkerchief in your hand. Is it the same material as the one in my hand? As long as it is the same material, it is mine. Qin Wanru sneered. Can you let me see what kind of handkerchief it is? An old maid of Duke Xing's mansion suddenly squeezed out of the crowd and bowed to Wang Xingxue respectfully. Wang Xingxue nodded and threw the handkerchief in his hand over. After the old maid took it and looked at it carefully, she murmured to herself with a little bit of confidence, is this the handkerchief of Chiyu Pavilion? Her voice was not loud, but it was enough to be heard clearly by several misses around her who were watching the fun. A miss took the handkerchief from the old maid's hand, pinched it, looked at the lines on the handkerchief, and said with certainty, this is indeed the handkerchief of Chiyu Pavilion. Since it is the handkerchief of Chiyu Pavilion, I heard that there are marks on it. The old maid immediately said. Yes, every handkerchief sold has a mark, and it is different every time. If you want to check it, you can still check it clearly. The miss holding the handkerchief nodded and passed the handkerchief to others. All the misses who saw it nodded. The handkerchief of Chiyu Pavilion was very famous, and the material used was different from other materials. Although there was basically no embroidery on it, it was delicate and soft, and there were special hidden marks. It was highly respected by the misses of aristocratic families in the capital city, but the price was extremely high, and ordinary families could not afford it. A small handkerchief could even match the price of a piece of clothing. Chapter 309. Yes, take it out and have a look. Just compare it. There is a secret mark on it. Yes, it's on the corner. You can see it after pulling off a small piece of thread. Several young madams who were familiar with the handkerchief of Chiyu Pavilion said at once. As they said so, everyone naturally looked at Qin Wanru. In the crowd, Wang Xingxue secretly wiped his cold sweat, with a little complacency in his eyes. Fortunately, he had also calculated that if the first plan failed, he would make a second plan. Otherwise, he would have made a mistake just now. Qin Wanru raised her eyes, looked at everyone calmly, and said with a slight smile, no need to look at it. My handkerchief is also bought from Chiyu Pavilion. Her words were very direct, without any evasion. The slender figure stood there elegantly, as if she was not talking about something that people suspected. Many madams looked at Qin Wanru in astonishment. Admitting that this handkerchief was also from Chiyu Pavilion was equivalent to admitting that Wang Xingxue's words were true. Whoever was involved in this kind of thing would ruin their reputation. If they were lucky, they could be a couple with Wang Xingxue, but their status would not be high. All aristocratic families knew that those who ran away would be concubines and those who were engaged would be wives. Was this miss of Ningyuan army general's mansion really young and insensible, or was she arrogant and rude to ignore it? Our miss is not afraid to look at it. You pull off that handkerchief and have a look. I will pull off our miss's handkerchief to show you. Yujie took the handkerchief from Qin Wanru's hand and said angrily. She pulled out a hairpin from her hair, picked up a corner of the handkerchief, and immediately picked out a small piece of thread. When she pulled this piece of thread, the thread was loosened a little, and a secret mark was seen. It was a very small embroidery pattern. The embroidery pattern was 2 characters of Ningyuan Army, and a very small 2. The handkerchief was also picked out in the hands of a young madam. It was also embroidered with 2 characters of Ningyuan Army, but it was 1. The handkerchief in Yujie's hand was taken by another young madam. She compared it and said in surprise, "One is 1, and the other is 2. They are both from Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Whether it is the first time or the second time, they are both from Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Can't it explain it? Second Miss Qin, you sent someone to ask me to come here, and now you're accusing me. What do you want? Are you going to find someone else?" Wang Xingxue sneered. Today, he would put the blame on Qin Wanru anyway. Qin Wanru had harmed her younger sister to the point where she could neither live nor die. Her aunt also said that if they couldn't start from Qin Wanru, her younger sister would be doomed. She might never be able to show up in front of others. Even for the sake of his sister, he could not let go of Qin Wanru. As a man, he was not familiar with the handkerchiefs of Chiyu Pavilion and didn't know the inside story. Now that he saw the marks of Ningyuan Army General's mansion, he thought that the matter was settled. Then his words had more hints. It reminded others of some rumors about Qin Yuru. It was said that Qin Yuru hooked up with Duke Yang's mansion and broke off the engagement with Qi Tianyu, who had been engaged before. Did it mean that the 2 of them had an affair long ago? All kinds of eyes looked at Qin Wanru contemptuously. Some were sarcastic, some were sneering, and some were waiting to see a good show. Seeing these kinds of eyes, Qin Wanru said lightly, "I heard that Chiyu Pavilion has an account when buying handkerchiefs. If they are from the same mansion, but bought by different people, they must have different signatures. I only remember that I bought it once. As for who bought it the other time, you can check it in Chiyu Pavilion. Ask someone from your mansion to check the account in Chiyu Pavilion." Yujie pulled the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion who came here before and said in a sharp tone without any panic. The master and the servant looked like they were going to show evidence, which made many people look at Wang Xingxue suspiciously. If it was found out that Qin Wanru really didn't buy it, the meaning behind it would be another in-depth investigation. Go and check it. I only know that I bought it once. I don't know where the handkerchief in Child Wang's hand came from. Qin Wanru's eyes became calmer, and her watery eyes were rolling with a bit of cold arrogance. Wang Xingxue was a little flustered, and his face changed slightly. He really didn't know that there were so many things to pay attention to, and he was a little flustered at the moment. The old maid of Duke Xing's mansion was also a little flustered, and she murmured, This matter, I can't make the decision, then go and find someone who can make the decision. As an old maid in charge, you dare to take charge of this kind of thing. I thought you were the henchman of Madame of Duke Xing and took charge of the affairs of the backyard. Qin Wanru's eyes became colder and colder. Even if she was really the henchman of Madame of Duke Xing, she didn't dare to say that she took charge of the affairs of the backyard. Go and check it, and prove our Miss's innocence. This child jumped out to stop our Miss and said that he would tell our Miss the truth that Miss Wang framed our Mississippi. I didn't expect that he had evil intentions. Since we talked about the handkerchief, let's find out who bought it. Whoever bought it is the one who invited Child Wang here. Yujie said angrily. She could now be sure that this handkerchief was one of the handkerchiefs that the first Miss gave to her Mississippi. No wonder the first Miss was so kind to give a batch of handkerchiefs to the second Mississippi. However, the first Miss didn't know that these handkerchiefs were now in the hands of Miss Qi, and the second Miss only had one. Because of this one, the second Miss specially asked her to find Chiyu Pavilion and buy a few more handkerchiefs. She usually used the few handkerchiefs she bought. Go and ask Madame of Duke Xing. Let Madame of Duke Xing send someone to check who bought the first batch of handkerchiefs in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Second Miss Qin should be wronged. Let's find out who bought the first batch of handkerchiefs. Seeing that Qin Wanru asked to go to Chiyu Pavilion to find evidence so calmly, many people thought that she should be wronged and unconsciously stood on her side. Several misses even spoke for her. Wang Xingshue's face turned pale. He didn't expect that there would be such a big change. He secretly gritted his teeth and knew that he couldn't retreat at this time. He immediately urged the old maid angrily, "Go now." "Wait a minute. I bought this handkerchief. What happened?" Before the old maid answered, a voice suddenly came from outside the crowd. Everyone looked back and saw Qin Yuru, who looked haggard, walking slowly with a servant girl. Her face was pale and she was almost listless, which made her originally beautiful facial features dim. "Second sister, what happened?" Qin Yuru walked into the crowd and forced a smile. No one saw that she held the handkerchief tightly in her sleeves. If she had not had no other choice, she would not have come out at this time. But just now everyone pointed the finger at the person who went to Chiyu Pavilion to buy the first batch of handkerchiefs. This kind of thing was not difficult to check. Since Chiyu Pavilion had made accounts, she couldn't deny it even if she wanted to. In fact, Qin Yuru had come long ago and had been hiding behind the crowd to watch the fun. But now she had to stand out. She was very flustered and tried to clench her teeth to hold on. Fortunately, she looked bad today. Otherwise, she would inevitably be seen by others. "Big sister, do you know who bought this handkerchief?" This child Wang insisted that I ask the servant girl to send the handkerchief out. Qin Wanru sneered. "Handkerchief of Chiyu Pavilion?" Qin Yuru seemed to see clearly the handkerchief in everyone's hands at this time and said in a low voice, "It is indeed the handkerchief of Chiyu Pavilion." Qin Wanru nodded. This handkerchief is bought by me, but didn't I give all the handkerchiefs to my second sister?" Qin Yuru seemed to be stunned for a moment, blinked and said. As soon as she said this, Wang Xingshue's eyes lit up. It seemed that there was a turning point. "Big sister gave me the handkerchief? When?" Qin Wanru also seemed to be stunned. She turned to look at Yujie and asked in a low voice, "Do you still remember this?" "Second sister, you are really forgetful. When I just arrived in the capital, I went out and came back. Didn't I send you some handkerchiefs?" Qin Yuru said with a smile. Qin Wanru still looked blank. Everyone looked at the two sisters and then looked at Wang Xingxue, with more doubts in their eyes. Did the first miss of Qin's mansion mean that her sister did have this kind of handkerchief in her hands and Wang Xingxue did not lie? "Miss, I remember that first miss did send you the handkerchief at that time." Yujie looked like she just remembered something, stamped her feet and said. "Look, now you have found the reason. There is no need to go to Chiyu Pavilion to check. Second Miss Qin, can you still say that this handkerchief has nothing to do with you now? First Miss Qin can also prove it." Wang Xingxue was complacent. He raised his eyebrows and mocked proudly. He sneered and squinted at Qin Wanru. "Second Miss Qin, do you still want to say that you never know me and won't send me the handkerchief?" The meaning of his words was to pour dirty water on Qin Wanru. At this point, in Wang Xingxue's view, Qin Wanru could not explain it clearly even if she had a lot of mouths. Naturally, he would say what he should say. "Big sister, do you also think that child Wang said that someone sent him the handkerchief because of me?" Qin Wanru was not flustered, but her smile became colder. I don't know." Qin Yuru was forced to murmur. She hesitated for a moment and her eyes drifted. Looking at Qin Wanru's expression, Qin Yuru did not dare to say anything definite. "Big sister, do you still have this kind of handkerchief in your hands?" Qin Wanru looked at Qin Yuru and smiled generously. The handkerchief that Qin Yuru showed Qin Wanru before should be from that batch. I only have one piece left, and the rest are all given to my sister." You should know this, shouldn't you?" Qin Yuru stammered and replied hurriedly. "First Miss, the reason why our Miss doesn't remember this is that she sent all the handkerchiefs you sent to First Miss Qi at that time. Our Miss didn't look at them carefully at all." Yujie was so angry that she couldn't listen anymore. The handkerchief in our Mrs. hand was bought by herself when she went out and passed by Chiyu Pavilion. It has nothing to do with first Mrs. Handkerchief. Her words were earth-shattering, and everyone widened their eyes in shock. Then does this matter have something to do with first Miss Chi? Was it sent by her? Wang Xingxue panicked at first and then became very anxious. He only felt that his back began to sweat, and he almost answered instinctively. Chapter 310. Wang Xingxue instinctively put the blame on Qi Rongji. Child Wang, your words are so strange. You said that we seem to have known each other for a long time, and I asked someone to give you this handkerchief. It's not that I haven't sent it before. Now you say that this handkerchief may be first Miss Chi's. Child Wang, don't you know who you have a relationship with, and you only talk about this inexplicably handkerchief? Qin Wanru sneered and looked at Wang Xingxue coldly and suspiciously. Her sharp eyes seemed to be able to penetrate people's hearts, and Wang Xingxue became more and more timid. Things changed so fast that his preface and postscript could not be connected. I thought it was second Miss Qin, you thought it was me, so you came out to stop me and asked the servant girl to call me. Even when I said that the handkerchief was not mine, you tried to slander me in vain, suggesting that we have known each other for a long time. Child Wang, just tell me whether we have known each other for a long time, when we met each other, and where I was at that time. Qin Wanru's voice was gentle, but her words were threatening, and her back was straight. She had not been in the capital for a long time, knew few people, and went out a few times, so she was really not afraid to confront Wang Xingxue. I. Wang Xingxue's forehead began to sweat, and his eyes rolled. For a moment, he did not know how to explain. He had thought that the overall situation had been settled, and said a lot of words that hinted that there was an ambiguous relationship between him and Qin Wanru, but he really could not show specific evidence to say where they knew each other. It was impossible for an unmarried miss like Qin Wanru to go out specially. What he said might not be the day when Qin Wanru went out, let alone the place. How could he make it up? Child Wang, I have no grudge with you and your sister in the past, and there is no hatred between us today, and the person we know is only Madame of Duke Xing. Why do you want to hurt me again and again? Your sister did this in the imperial palace, and now you do this here. Is there really any hatred between our Ningyuan army general's mansion and your mansion? Qin Wanru's eyes flashed with a trace of deepness, and she stared at Wang Xingxue and said. It can't be true, can it? Ningyuan army general's mansion has just entered the capital, and they have a grudge against the mansion? That's not possible, right? Wang Xingxue and Wang Yishu hurt the miss of Qin's mansion like this. Are they out of their minds? It doesn't look like it, but does it have anything to do with Madame of Duke Xing? Don't tell me that they have nothing to do with each other, and the only one who is related to each other is Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing doesn't like this second Miss Qin. All kinds of speculations sounded around them. Everyone seemed to be enlightened as they quietly discussed among themselves. The rustling sound drilled into Wang Xingxue's ears like a thin thread. Wang Xingxue's face became even more panicked. Until now, he didn't know how to deal with it. The scene had completely deviated from his imagination. Excuse me, our madam is here. Someone shouted outside the crowd. Everyone looked over and saw Madame of Duke Xing walk in angrily with a large group of servant girls and old maids. He walked up to Wang Xingxue, stretched out his hand, and gave Wang Xingxue a hard slap. You're so naughty. I told you that your sister asked for it. I don't know who instigated her to hurt second Miss Qin. How dare you make such a scene? Are you two going to make me and your uncle die of anger? It seemed that Madame of Duke Xing had just come here in a hurry after getting the news. There was a slight sweat on her usually dignified and decent face. She looked at Wang Xingxue with eyes full of disappointment, sadness and pain, as if she was extremely disappointed with her beloved junior. She was so angry that her whole body trembled slightly. She was exasperated at Wang Xingxue's failure. Aunt, my sister is like this now, almost hanging by a thread. I can't bear it. This slap woke Wang Xingxue up. He knelt down with a plop and burst into tears. My good sister was thrown out like this after entering the palace. She is my only sister. As a man, he cried so sadly, which made some people around him sympathize with him. Although Wang Yishu had done something wrong, she was Wang Xingxue's sister after all. Many people automatically imagined the reason for what happened today. It should be that Wang Xingxue knew that the second miss of Qin's mansion came here, so he deliberately made such a scene in order to avenge his sister. Child Wang, where did you get the handkerchief in your hand? Qin Wanru didn't intend to let Wang Xingxue go, so she asked coldly. Tell me, where did you get this handkerchief? Did you secretly take Rongji's handkerchief? Madame of Duke Xing also asked angrily with her eyes full of anger. Who would like such a thing to happen on a happy day? What's more, it was obvious that Wang Xingxue had done something bad. Aunt, it's my fault. Please forgive me this time for the sake that my sister's life and death are unknown. Wang Xingxue kowtowed heavily to Madame of Duke Xing several times and cried. You, what do you want me to say? How can you do this? Have you read all the books of sages in vain? Your sister has only herself to blame for her ending. It's not second Miss Qin's fault. Madame of Duke Xing was so angry that her face turned pale and she couldn't continue her words. She finally took a breath, turned to Qin Wanru and said decisively, Second Miss Qin, it's our mansion's fault. Xingxue is the nephew of our mansion. You can deal with it as you see fit. No matter what, please spare his life. He still has a half-dead sister to take care of. Madame of Duke Xing's words were very appropriate. Seeing that she was so angry that her face turned pale, many madams couldn't help persuading her. Although Wang Xingxue was the nephew of Duke Xing's mansion, it was not Madame of Duke Xing's fault that he didn't make any progress. Thinking of his dying sister and seeing him crying like this, many people felt their hearts soften. Although Wang Xingxue did something wrong, he was actually willing to do it, wasn't he? Qin Wanru sneered in her heart. Madame of Duke Xing was really cunning. With just a few words, she immediately cleared her suspicion and made people think that she was decent and polite. The flower hall that she left before was actually not too far away from here. Even a guest like Qin Yuru had arrived early, but Madame of Duke Xing, the master, just got the news and came here in a hurry. In fact, it was the most unreasonable. And now, he even pushed the blame to her. This was because he saw that she was just a weak girl in the boudoir, and in such a situation, he would definitely show his magnanimity and turn this big matter into a small one, and then a small one into nothing. As the victim, she didn't say anything. Even if there were others on her side, it was inconvenient for them to say anything. Madame of Duke Xing was good at scheming, but she missed Qin Wanru's dislike for weak girls. In the last life, she was not a weak girl, and even her own safety was at the mercy of others. In this life, how could she let such a weak girl fall on her? If she was too weak, she would be bullied. She didn't want to be such a weak girl. Madame of Duke Xing, I can't deal with this matter. Since Child Wang wants to hurt me for Miss Wang, then send him to the officials. Coincidentally, we can also find out what happened in the palace. Why did Miss Wang want to hurt me? Who added fuel to the fire behind it? I never thought that Miss Wang was the culprit who wanted to hurt me. After all, we haven't met before. Qin Wanru thought for a while and said with deep meaning. Madame of Duke Xing's eyes showed a trace of ghastly anger. She didn't expect that Qin Wanru would not give her face and even wanted to send Wang Xingxue to the officials. If it was related to what happened in the palace, she would definitely be severely punished as soon as she was sent to the officials. Even if Madame of Duke Xing was omnipotent, it would be inconvenient at this time, and she didn't dare to do anything. She calmed herself down. Although she restrained the anger at the bottom of her eyes, her face looked very bad. Obviously, she didn't agree with Qin Wanru's approach. This is not good, is it? It's better to deal with this kind of thing privately. After all, a girl's integrity is more important. A madam beside Madam of Duke Xing coughed in a low voice and advised. Yes, although Wang Xingxue doesn't make progress, he is the nephew of Duke Xing's mansion. If it is spread out, the whole Duke Xing's mansion will be disgraced. Second Miss Qin, you'd better not involve Duke Xing's mansion. After all, this matter has nothing to do with Duke Xing's mansion directly. Yes. It's not good to make it too big. Second Miss Qin's reputation is important, so is the reputation of Duke Xing's mansion. This matter is neither Duke Xing's mansion's fault nor Second Miss Qin's. Since someone came out to persuade her, a large group of people naturally came out. Many people didn't have enough status to curry favor with Madam of Duke Xing in the past. At this time, seeing that the opportunity came and Madam of Duke Xing was obviously unhappy, they naturally found a chance to curry favor with her. Madam of Duke Xing didn't speak, but a trace of sarcasm flashed in her eyes. She didn't believe that Qin Wanru dared to trample on the dignity of so many madams. Even if her scheme failed, so what? This matter was the same as Wang Yishu's matter and couldn't be blamed on her. Madam of Duke Xing's eyes fell on Wang Xingxue and felt annoyed. They were all useless. Wang Xingxue had promised her before that he would definitely take Qin Wanru down. He said that it was not difficult to deal with an unmarried woman. As long as he was shameless, he could do anything. Looking at such a mess now and asking her to clean up the mess, Madam of Duke Xing couldn't bear the anger in her eyes. In the eyes of others, such anger was that Madam of Duke Xing really hated Wang Xingxue for failing to meet her expectations. Therefore, more and more people began to speak up for Wang Xingxue. Chapter 311. Qin Wanru's words were very light and her expression was calm, as if she was talking about her life and death, but the meaning in her words made all the young madams present feel terrified. If this happened to them, they would really be ruined today. If Wang Xingxue, a person with low moral character, had an ambiguous relationship with them, if they were not his concubine, they would really have to die. Thinking about it carefully, they were all terrified and filled with righteous indignation at the moment. Remove his official rank. Yes, remove his official rank. How can such a person be an official? What kind of person is he? How dare he take the examination for official rank? Remove him. We must remove him. Putting themselves in Wang Xingxue's shoes, the young madams were all resentful. Wang Xingxue in front of them made them feel disgusted and disgusted. A girl's reputation was so important and fragile. They usually maintained their thin reputation and did not dare to make any mistakes. But men were different. It seemed that men were born to be superior to women. Even if they had a bad reputation, it did not matter. In the past, this kind of thing was often left unsettled because of the woman. But when they thought about it carefully, they felt horrible. All the young madams could not stand still. Even if they did not send him to the government office for the sake of Madam of Duke Xing's face, removing his official rank would not affect the reputation of Duke Xing's mansion. Wang Xingxing's expression truly changed. It became as pale as snow, and his eyes became dull. He indeed had scholarly honors. The Wang clan had already fallen, but he still wanted to use the scholarly honors to make his clan prosper. Even if he could not take the examination for official rank, with the recommendation of Duke Xing's mansion, his future would be very promising instead of always being a young master of a declining aristocratic family. But if his official rank was really removed, he would not have a bright future in the future. Aunt, I still have my sister to take care of. Aunt, I dare not do it again. Wang Xingxue begged Madam of Duke Xing, looking at his flustered face. If he was sent to the government office, he would definitely confess everything in a few words. Although Duke Xing's mansion was not afraid of it, it would be troublesome if it was involved in the past. Having made the decision in her heart, Madam of Duke Xing showed a stern face and said, "Someone come and take him away." "Yes, madam." Two supervisor old maids came over and dragged Wang Xingxue down. The old maids were strong, but Wang Xingxue was just a weak scholar. Even though he struggled a few times, he was still suppressed and dragged out. Madame of Duke Xing raised her eyes and looked at Qin Wanru with a bitter smile. "Second Miss Qin, don't worry. Duke Xing's mansion will definitely give you an explanation this time." "Thank you, madam." "We'll remove his official rank," Qin Wanruan said. "Madam." "Don't worry, second Miss Qin. It won't happen again." Madame of Duke Xing nodded and then sighed. When he was young, he was also a good boy. I didn't expect that he would become like this now. It's all my fault. After saying, she, madam, and she, mansion. Madam, immediately, many madams began to sympathize with Madame of Duke Xing and comforted her one after another. Every family had a few unworthy relatives, and the Wang siblings were just like that. Madame of Duke Xing really couldn't be blamed for this kind of thing. "Second sister, I really thought it was. Now it's great." Qin Yuru raised her pale face and excitedly reached out to hold Qin Wanru's hand. She looked like she was congratulating Qin Wanru for surviving the disaster. Qin Wanru stepped back and quietly avoided Qin Yuru's hand. "Big sister, did you think it was me just now?" Qin Yuru looked at Qin Wanru with a face full of fear and tears. She shook her head hard and said, "Why would I think it was my second sister? I just feel that there must be some mystery behind it. Second sister is so smart to find out the truth so quickly. If I wasn't smart, I would have lost my life." Qin Wanru said calmly. It seemed that she did not want to say anything more to Qin Yuru and turned to leave. Now that the matter had been resolved, there was no point in staying any longer. Qin Yuru seemed to have noticed Qin Wanru's indifference. She hurriedly took 2 steps forward and tried to pull Qin Wanru's sleeve again. However, she failed to do so and Qin Wanru's sleeve slipped through her hand. Her body swayed and she could not stand straight. She fell heavily to the ground. Mei Shui, who was behind her, screamed and reached out to help her. However, she failed and they fell together. It was so unexpected. Everyone looked at Qin Wanru in astonishment and then looked at Qin Yuru, who fell to the ground. They did not know what was going on. "Ah, wrist!" Someone suddenly screamed. Everyone's eyes fell on Qin Yuru's arm, which had been thrown out. There were blue and red marks on her arm, and there were faint bloodstains. It was obvious that she had been beaten and scratched. All the people present couldn't help changing their faces, and they immediately looked at Qin Wanru. Was it because of the fight between the 2 sisters? Qin Yuru tore off her sleeves and shivered. Miss, are you okay? Is it very painful? Let's go back and apply some medicine." Mei Shui said anxiously. She sat up in tears and wanted to reach out to hold Qin Yuru's hand. However, when she saw the red mark under Qin Yuru's sleeve, she did not dare to hold her tightly. She just cried anxiously. "What's going on? Who beat you?" Madame of Duke Xing's face was as dark as water. Qin Yuru stood up with Mei Shui's hand. Her face was pale. "Madam, I'm fine. I was careless." Her words were obviously an excuse. Accidentally falling down was totally different from being scratched and wounded on both arms. "Miss," Mei Shui said sadly. Qin Wanru stood still and looked at Qin Yuru's wound thoughtfully. A strange idea suddenly came into her mind. "Tell me what happened to your first Mississippi. Did you servants not serve her well enough to make your first miss become like this?" Madame of Duke Xing said to Mei Shui sharply. Mei Shui was scared and shook her head hurriedly. "No, it's Madam." "Madam," she stammered, but her words were not clear, so people could not guess who the madam was. "Mei Shui, don't say it!" Qin Yuru shouted angrily. "Yes, I won't say it." Mei Shui lowered her head and sobbed in a low voice. "But what about the wound on Mrs. Hand?" "Madam." "Why did Madam?" Although she didn't finish her words, many people understood what she meant. Madame of Duke Xing frowned tightly and asked, was it Madame D who hurt first Miss like this? No. No. Qin Yuru said anxiously. Her voice was a little loud, which made people feel that she was bluffing. First Miss, why did Madame D beat you? Madame of Duke Xing ignored her explanation and asked in confusion. I don't know. Qin Yuru's words almost destroyed her psychological defense. She burst into tears. Tears fell down her cheeks as she choked with sobs. It was really Madame D who beat her. Everyone present was stunned. Why did Madame D beat her biological daughter like this? No wonder when first Miss Qin appeared in front of everyone, she looked pale and forced a smile. She was obviously covering up for her biological mother. She was a filial daughter. Many madams could not help but praise her secretly. Qin Wanru stood quietly aside and watched Qin Yuru and Mei Shui's acting. Her watery eyes became more and more deep. Madame D was really cruel. For Qin Yuru, she was willing to lose any reputation. Even the reputation of treating her daughter badly was revealed in front of everyone. She was extremely vicious. It could be seen that she had reached a dead end. Someone, go and find a doctor to treat first Miss Qin. Madame of Duke Xing ordered the servant beside her. Immediately, a quick-witted maid ran out. First Miss Qin, go to the guest room and have a rest. The doctor will treat you later. Madame of Duke Xing comforted Qin Yuru softly. Thank you, madam. Qin Yuru wiped her tears with a handkerchief and thanked her carefully. Big sister, I will go with you. Qin Wanru stood out and said. This. Second sister, thank you. Qin Yuru became more and more delicate and pitiful. She thanked Qin Wanru with red eyes. Big sister, you are welcome. Qin Wanru said. When the onlookers saw that there was nothing else to do, they dispersed. They pointed at the Qin sisters and secretly discussed among themselves. What happened today was related to the Qin sisters. They didn't know if it was because of their bad luck or some other reason, but things kept happening to them. Speaking of the Qin sisters, there was a rumor in the capital city. It was unknown who first said that Qin Wanru was raised in the name of Madame D, but later it was found that she was not her biological daughter. However, for so many years, she had always claimed that she was her biological daughter. This reminded people of Qin Yuru's exposed wounds just now. Someone suddenly thought that this first Miss Qin might not be Madame D's biological daughter. How could her biological daughter be so ruthless? As soon as this was said, many people immediately agreed with it. They thought that this was the only answer. Otherwise, Qin Yuru could not have so many wounds on her hands. How ruthless must she be to hurt her like this? A miss who was fine, looked pale and was in low spirits, but she still insisted on being treated. It really made people feel pity for her. Some words were like this. The more it was said, the more reasonable it seemed. Everyone speculated. In addition to the previous rumor about Qin Wanru's origin, almost most madams thought that Qin Yuru was not Madame D's biological daughter, just raised in the name of Madame D, like Qin Wanru. These discussions spread among the guests silently. More and more people heard such a rumor. When the crowd dispersed, Qin Wanru looked at Qin Yuru with cold eyes. Chapter 312. This slap destroyed the calmness and softness that Qin Yuru pretended to be. Her face immediately turned livid. She covered her face with resentment and said angrily, Qin Wanru, you. Before she could finish her words, another heavy slap landed on her face. This slap made Qin Yuru explode. She had never suffered such a loss before. She put down her hand that was covering her face and wanted to give Qin Wanru a backhand slap. She had never suffered such a loss in her life, and this loss was given by Qin Wanru, whom she despised the most. Qin Yuru, as long as you dare to slap me, I dare to let others see how the delicate and dignified first Miss Qin swallows her anger. Qin Wanru looked straight into Qin Yuru's eyes and sneered, I don't care what you're plotting, what do you want to do, and why are you pretending to be wronged? But since you dare to pretend, you must endure it. These words almost rushed out of her mouth fiercely. Qin Wanru's beautiful eyes were so cold as if they were dipped in cold water, without a trace of warmth. These two slaps were connected with the resentment of the last life. Some puzzles in the last life slowly surfaced. Madame D and her daughter were really good at scheming, or in other words, Madame D and her daughter and Madame of Duke Xing were really good at scheming. They actually made every step and now even figured out whether Qin Yuru was Madame D's biological daughter or not. It turned out to be so. Qin Yuru's hand stopped in front of Qin Wanru's face, and she looked ferocious and hesitant. She pretended to be weak in front of others, like a young girl who knew filial piety and etiquette. If others found out that she slapped Qin Wanru, all her previous actions would be in vain. Some of the wounds on her hand were real and painful. If it were not for the glory and wealth, Qin Yuru would never hurt herself like this. For the sake of her own future, and to better clear her name so that she could have a strong backer, Qin Yuru slowly lowered her hand. Her face was flushed with anger. She lowered her voice and threatened Qin Wanru fiercely, Qin Wanru, do you know that you are courting death? Qin Yuru, what do you want to do? Isn't she Madame D's biological daughter? Is this your purpose? Qin Wanru looked straight at Qin Yuru's face and said lightly. Qin Yuru was nervous and immediately shouted, you're talking nonsense. Are you talking nonsense? Do you want to ask my father to prove that you are not Madame D's biological daughter? My father should know best, right? Qin Wanru said bluntly. Qin Wanru, don't talk nonsense. I didn't say that my mother's biological daughter was not me. Listening to Qin Wanru's words, Qin Yuru seemed to be vaguely aware of her and her mother's plot. Qin Yuru became more anxious and stared at Qin Wanru with a livid face. Qin Yuru, I don't want to know what you and Madame D are plotting. I just want to know why the handkerchief you gave me appeared with Child Wang. Qin Wanru sneered and changed the topic. Speaking of this topic, Qin Yuru breathed a sigh of relief in her heart and looked at Qin Wanru in confusion. She felt that what Qin Wanru said just now was not because she really knew something, but because of the matter of the handkerchief. As he thought of this, he felt slightly relieved. She was also surprised about the matter of the handkerchief. How do I know about the matter of the handkerchief? I only kept one piece and then gave all of them to you. You said that Qi Rongji, maybe Qi Rongji framed you. It has nothing to do with me. Qin Yuru said angrily. Does it have anything to do with Qi Rongji? Qin Wanru raised the corner of her mouth sarcastically. Who else but her? You have seen my handkerchief. As for Qi Rongji's, you ask someone to count how many pieces she has. If it is missing, it must be her who framed you. What does it have to do with me? I am just saying a fact. Qin Yuru rolled her eyes and sneered. Since she was exposed by Qin Wanru, she didn't need to pretend anymore. Qin Yuru didn't like either Qi Rongji or Qin Wanru. It was best to let them quarrel among themselves. As for the result, she didn't care at all. The more they quarreled, the more harmful it would be. She also wanted to let Madame of Duke Xing know that Qi Rongji was a person who was not presentable at all and was far inferior to her. Are you so sure that it is first Miss Qi who framed me and not you? Qin Wanru looked at her suspiciously. Second sister, although I don't like you, you are my sister after all. There are only two sisters in our Qin's mansion, and we are connected wherever we go. If you are not good, how can I be good? Although Qi Rongji is raised in our mansion, she has nothing to do with us. She has been intimate with my cousin before. At first glance, I know she is not a good person. In order to win Qin Wanru's trust, Qin Yuru simply turned up the matter of Di Yan. She even fought with Qi Rongji for Qin Wanru's affection. For this reason, she also hoped that something bad would happen to Qi Rongji. She didn't want to see Qi Rongji's glorious side. "Qin Yuru, you bitch, what nonsense are you talking about?" When she just finished her words, Qi Rongji's voice suddenly came from behind the rockery in front of her. Qin Wanru took 2 steps back, looked at Qi Rongji who was rushing over angrily, and made way for her. "You." Qin Yuru didn't expect Qi Rongji to suddenly appear, and she was so shocked that she took a step back. Qi Rongji rushed over, stretched out her hand to slap Qin Yuru's face fiercely, and scolded, "Qin Yuru, you are a fickle bitch. After having an affair with my brother, you kicked him away and wanted to marry into another noble family. Now you have come to the capital city and got engaged with Duke Yong's mansion as you wish. How dare you still think about my brother? How shameless you are." Her voice was very loud, with anger and hatred, and it was almost a roar. "Qi Rongji, you are talking nonsense." Qin Yuru was very anxious, and her face became pale. Although there were not many people at this time, if a few people walked a little slower, they would have heard it clearly. Unlike Qin Wanru, Qi Rongji's voice was very loud. "Is it nonsense? Do you want to invite my brother to come over? Qin Yuru, who do you want to marry? Don't be so stubborn. If you want the position of Duke Yong's mansion, don't pester my brother anymore. My brother can marry a lady from a noble family, and you are not the only one." Qi Rongji said disdainfully, and scolded Qin Yuru impolitely. Like Qin Yuru, she also hated each other, and even felt that in some aspects, Qin Yuru was even more annoying than Qin Wanru. Now she was finally going to stand out, but Qin Yuru poured a pot of dirty water on her. Such a big thing happened in the mansion, and it was on her wedding day. Qi Rongji had already received the news and rushed over. But when she left Qin's mansion, she was called over by Qin Wanru, who told her that Qin Yuru also wanted to be the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, and said that Qin Yuru had a higher chance of winning than Qi Rongji with the help of Countess Yong and Madame D. If Qin Yuru succeeded in becoming the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, Qi Rongji would only have the title of the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing in the end, and there would be no other benefits. This was the most intolerable thing for Qi Rongji. She still wanted to rely on Duke Xing's mansion to marry a good man from an aristocratic family. How could she let Qin Yuru succeed? She knew herself well. If Qin Wanru had not refused at that time, she would not have the title of the adopted daughter. It was impossible to say that Madame of Duke Xing liked her very much. It could be seen from Madame of Duke Xing's mansion's etiquette that she was just a bystander. Because of this, she would not easily let Qin Yuru become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing. Otherwise, Qin Yuru, who had the background of Duke Yong's mansion and Madame D, would definitely suppress her. After thinking this through, she took a closer look when she saw the commotion here. Later, she saw that she was involved in this matter, and Qin Wanru explained it clearly. Otherwise, she could not bear it at that time. The next scene made her feel even more ridiculous. Qin Yuru was actually beaten by Madame D, and she was beaten so severely, as if she was not her biological daughter. How could this be possible? Others did not know how much Madame D loved Qin Yuru, but she did. It was obvious that Qin Yuru wanted to plot something. The more she looked at it, the more she thought that she wanted to please Madame of Duke Xing. Even for this purpose, she pretended to be estranged from Madame D. Because Qin Wanru had told her before that Qin Yuru also wanted to become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing, Qi Rongji felt that Qin Yuru was more and more suspicious. What Qin Wanru said was right. She had some doubts before, but after seeing Qin Yuru's pretentiousness, all her doubts disappeared. Wang Xingshua's matter did not involve her in the end, so she did not come out. After everyone left, she wanted to come out, but she saw the two sisters quarreling, so she simply watched the fun on the side. Unexpectedly, when she heard Qin Yuru said that she framed Qin Wanru, she could not hold back her anger anymore. She rushed out and slapped Qin Yuru hard. She was really not afraid of making trouble. She wanted to let others see Qin Yuru's disgusting face, so that Madame of Duke Xing would never accept Qin Yuru as her adopted daughter again. You too actually. Qin Yuru covered her face. After being slapped by the two of them in succession, her eyes turned red, but she knew that she could not really make trouble at this time, so she stamped her feet angrily and said, Qin Wanru, I will go back and tell my father that you and Qi Rongji actually beat me together. After saying that, she covered her face and ran away crying. She did not dare to make trouble here, otherwise all the previous efforts here would be in vain. Seeing Qin Yuru leave, Qi Rongji turned her head angrily, looked at Qin Wanru with hatred, and said with an unfriendly face, Qin Wanru, what do you mean? Why did you give me the handkerchief that Qin Yuru gave you? Do you want to frame me? I did give big sister's handkerchief to you at that time. This is the truth, and I also explained it later. It is not your fault. Qin Wanru said calmly. Qi Rongji had suffered a lot in Qin Wanru's hands. Hearing Qin Wanru say so, she immediately glared at her angrily, said nothing more, and turned to leave. She had to keep an eye on Qin Yuru, in case she went to flatter Madame of Duke Xing again. Compared with Qin Yuru, who wanted to be liked by Madame of Duke Xing very much, Qin Wanru, who had rejected Madame of Duke Xing before, was not so threatening. Looking at Qi Rongji's back leaving, Qin Wanru slightly raised the corners of her mouth. Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru's interests were against each other, and she was looking forward to the next thing. Cousin, how could it be like this? A delicate exclamation came from behind. Yujie's face changed, and she hurriedly looked back. Chapter 313. On the diagonal path, Gu Shishu stared at them blankly and covered her mouth with a handkerchief in surprise, looking so delicate and frightened that she was about to faint. Beside her, Wen Shiqi looked at them with deep eyes and a gentle expression. Dressed in a large green robe embroidered with bamboo, he looked like an elegant child. The two of them stood on the path not far from them and seemed to have watched them for a while. Qin Wanru looked at the distance and knew that even if they could hear them, they would not hear much. They might not even hear anything. After all, if they had been here for a long time, Qi Rongji would have seen them when they talked to each other in this direction. Looking at the winding path, Qin Wanru was lost in thought. Qi Rongji should have seen what Qin Wanru did but did not hear them. However, this delicate Miss Gu looked frightened again. Gu Shishu was still as delicate as ever. Cousin, let's go. Seeing Qin Wanru turn her eyes, Gu Shishu immediately pulled Wen Shiqi's sleeve with a timid look. It seemed that she was really frightened by Qin Wanru. Second Miss Qin. Wen Shiqi ignored her and strode forward with a slight smile. Third young master Wen. Qin Wanru bowed sideways and stepped back slightly to keep a certain distance from him. Seeing that Wen Shiqi ignored her, Gu Shishu was so angry that she secretly gritted her teeth, but she did not dare to show it on her face. She knew that her third cousin was extremely smart. She took 2 steps forward and stood behind Wen Shiqi. Her bright and beautiful eyes were filled with shyness and timidity, making her look adorable and lovable. Second Miss Qin, were you quarreling with someone just now? Wen Shiqi asked gently. Did he mean that he did not see her beat Qin Yuru but saw the quarrel between Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji? Qin Wanru breathed a sigh of relief. She was not worried that Wen Shiqi would talk nonsense, but Gu Shishu was not so sure, and she might even exaggerate. First Miss Qi and Big Sister had some disputes. When they were in the mansion, they did not get along well. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said softly. Didn't second Miss Qin help this first Miss Qi to bully your big sister? Gu Shishu couldn't help asking. Miss, where did you see that from? Do you want me to ask big sister to come over and explain to you? Qin Wanru raised her long eyelashes. There was a faint smile in her watery eyes, but it was a little cold. But we just saw Miss Qi hit your elder sister, and you didn't say anything. In fact, Gu Shishu didn't see it clearly. She just saw Qi Rongji hit Qin Yuru from a distance and then seemed to argue with her. After seeing Qin Wanru's face clearly, Gu Shishu asked Wen Shiqi to come over. When they arrived, not only did Qin Yuru leave, but Qi Rongji also left. What are you trying to say, Miss Gu? Qin Wanru smiled meaningfully, with a pair of clear watery eyes, which made people feel that her facial features were more exquisite and refined. Gu Shishu didn't like Qin Wanru. Almost at the first time she saw her, she felt disgusted. Although Qin Wanru still looked like a little girl, she made Gu Shishu feel threatened. Since when would her third cousin take the initiative to greet a woman? For this reason, Gu Shishu would never like Qin Wanru. I don't want to say anything. I just feel that first Miss Qin is in pain. Gu Shishu said softly and pressed the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief, as if she really felt sorry for Qin Yuru. Go out from here, turn a corner, and then go straight. Qin Wanru stepped aside to make way, reached out a finger, and said with a smile. What? Gu Shishu was stunned for a moment and didn't understand the meaning of Qin Wanru's words. Go out from here, turn a corner, and then go straight, and you will see first Miss Qi. Thank you for feeling sorry for my sister. If you really want to, you can catch up with her. I believe first Miss Qi will give you a satisfactory answer. Qin Wanru looked at Gu Shishu with a smile like a flower. Gu Shishu's face stiffened, and she almost couldn't maintain the softness on her face. She pulled the handkerchief in her hand hard twice. Of course, she understood the meaning of Qin Wanru's words. She meant that if she really felt sorry for the first miss of Qin's mansion, she should catch up with the person who beat the first miss of Qin's mansion. If she didn't catch up with her, she should make her shut up. Don't pretend to sympathize with others here, but all you can do is talk. Gu Shishu understood Qin Wanru's words, and also knew that her third cousin also understood. But she knew it when she saw the expression on Wen Shiqi's face. For a moment, she felt wronged and ashamed. She covered her face with a handkerchief, and her eyes turned red. Second Miss Qin, how can you do this? Haven't I always been like this? Do you know me, miss? Qin Wanru said in surprise. Miss, this miss is the one who snatched the hairpin that you liked before. After that, she broke the hairpin. It was you who paid for her. Yujia understood and continued the next sentence, pointing at Gu Shishu angrily. Ah, it's you. Qin Wanru suddenly understood. Her butterfly-like long eyelashes fluttered twice, and there was a little surprise in her eyes, as if she really just recognized Gu Shishu. Gu Shishu's face turned red. Yujia, do you still have the list from last time? Qin Wanru turned back and asked in a low voice. Miss, yes. The shopkeeper wrote it to thank you, saying that the hairpin was broken by another pitiful lady, and you just paid for her. Yujia took the opportunity to say. That's good. Miss, do you want to pay for it? Qin Wanru asked with a smile. Her expression was gentle and her beautiful eyes were as clear as water. The corner of her pink lips curled into a dark red color, making her look even more alluring. This kind of smiling state made her look like a little fairy that had walked out of a painting. But this situation only existed in the eyes of others. Gu Shishu only felt that Qin Wanru in front of her was extremely hateful, and she could not wait to tear the beautiful face that made her jealous. Third cousin, you look at this person. She said to Wen Shiqi in a spoiled manner with a sob. Where's the list? When Shiqi smiled slightly, his handsome eyes fell on Qin Wanru's pink little face, and he asked gently. Does third young master Wen want to pay for it? Qin Wanru said with dissatisfaction, forget it. Anyway, I don't have it with me now. It seems that your cousin is about to cry, so I'll leave first. Otherwise, if someone sees it from a distance, I'm afraid that third young master Wen and I bullied your cousin together. This corresponded to what Gu Shishu said before when she saw Qi Rongji hit Qin Yuru. She was watching the scene. Gu Shishu's face turned red, and she secretly gritted her teeth. After saying this, Qin Wanru bowed sideways to Wen Shiqi again, and then turned to leave with Yujie. Wen Shiqi smiled thoughtfully and looked at Qin Wanru's resolute back. He slightly raised the corner of his mouth. This little girl was very sharp-tongued, and it seemed that she still bore a grudge against what he said last time. Third cousin, why is she so stingy? It's just a matter of a hairpin. At that time, I didn't know that she liked it first, and then I didn't know that it was broken. If I knew, I would pay for it myself. Gu Shishu gently pulled Wen Shiqi's sleeve and said with grievance. Her red eyes were full of tears, and she looked extremely pitiful. Wen Shiqi took a step back to keep a certain distance from Gu Shishu, and his eyes fell on Gu Shishu's face. In the past, Wen Shiqi would definitely comfort Gu Shishu at this time, and even buy some gifts to make her happy. They grew up together. Since his younger sister was gone, he had wholeheartedly regarded Gu Shishu as his younger sister. Since their childhood, his younger sister had a good relationship with Gu Shishu. They were like sisters, and they went in and out together. Now his younger sister was gone, and Gu Shishu became Wen Shiqi's younger sister after he had fallen in love with her. How could he not love his younger sister? But now, he couldn't help but feel tired of the pitiful face in the past. There was no trace of pity in his eyes, and his long and handsome eyes narrowed slightly. Although his smile was still warm, his behavior was indifferent and almost emotionless. Cousin, let's go. Second brother is still waiting for us. It's still so early. Second cousin won't be so anxious. Third cousin, I seldom come to Duke Xing's mansion. I heard that there is an excellent place in their mansion. Can I go and have a look? Gu Shishu didn't want to go back like this. She wanted to be alone with Wen Shiqi. It was really inconvenient for her to stay in the Prime Minister's mansion because of second cousin. She wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief and pretended to be magnanimous and didn't want to talk about this matter. She knew that Wen Shiqi didn't like to hear others gossip behind his back. Where is it? Wen Shiqi said casually. Even though he was unwilling to accompany Gu Shishu at all, it couldn't be seen on his face. He was still handsome and elegant. I heard that the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion left a screen wall for calligraphy in the mansion, and he practiced calligraphy there since he was a child. Third cousin, shall we go and have a look? Gu Shishu rolled her eyes and said in a sweet voice. The former heir of Duke Xing's mansion? Wen Shiqi frowned and said, how do you know about this? In Duke Xing's mansion, the matter about the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion was a taboo. He learned about the screen wall by chance, and he only mentioned it to his second brother in the mansion. I heard it from someone. Third cousin, let's go and have a look now. I heard that the former heir of Duke Xing used to be a romantic figure with excellent calligraphy. I haven't seen it yet. Third cousin, can you take me there to have a look? Gu Shishu said in a sweet voice, thinking that her words were very appropriate and reasonable. Of course, her purpose was to please Wen Shiqi. Wen Shiqi liked this kind of calligraphy very much. Every time there was a good calligraphy, he would definitely go and have a look. These words were specially said to Wen Shiqi's heart, and what she said was also Wen Shiqi's idea. Gu Shishu was sure that Wen Shiqi would like it. Although her words were full of begging, she looked a little complacent and slightly raised the corners of her mouth. She didn't believe that Wen Shiqi would not agree when she talked about his favorite thing. She looked in the direction where Qin Wanru disappeared. So what if he is good-looking? Who knows third cousin better than me? Chapter 314. Wen Shiqi said lightly and looked at Gu Shishu with an ambiguous look. Third cousin, let's go. The grievance on Gu Shishu's face disappeared and she immediately smiled. She gently reached out to pull Wen Shiqi's sleeve again. Wen Shiqi stepped back, avoided her hand, and said gently, cousin, don't pull my sleeve in the future. It looks a little rude. Third cousin, haven't we always been like this before? Gu Shishu looked surprised, and then her eyes turned red again, as if she was about to cry. We were still young before. Wen Shiqi sighed softly. Third cousin, you've changed. You weren't like this before. Gu Shishu looked at Wen Shiqi sadly and disappointed, silently blaming him. Cousin, you will get married and leave in the future, and I will also get married. When I grow up, this kind of childhood behavior is not appropriate. Even if you are brother and sister, you should avoid arousing suspicion, not to mention that you are not related by blood. Wen Shiqi said softly, as if he did not see Gu Shishu's sad eyes. Third cousin is going to get married? Is it the thing that was spread in the mansion before? Gu Shishu's face was pale, and tears fell down her cheeks. She looked so miserable that it made people feel sorry for her, as if something was broken. Such a look, such a behavior, such a beautiful face, any man would feel sorry for her and couldn't bear to see her so sad. This was the way to soften a finger. This was also Gu Shishu's trick in the past. Whether it was second cousin, third cousin, or even the elders in the mansion and eldest cousin, they all agreed to this trick. When Shiqi reached out to press his forehead and said helplessly, Cousin, it's inevitable for me to get married. Not only me, but also second brother. Father must mean to make an early decision for us, in case we can't find a good lady from a famous family. Find a lady from a famous family? Gu Shishu felt that her heart was about to break. She couldn't believe what she heard. Wasn't she a lady from a famous family? Why didn't she choose a lady from a famous family? I heard that the person who came from the mansion is from Qin's mansion. Is third cousin the one who came just now? Then Gu Shishu took a step back and almost fell. The servant girl who followed her hurriedly reached out to help her, but was pushed away by her. It must be her. Otherwise, how could third cousin know her and clearly call her second Miss Qin? When we met last time, third cousin didn't know who she was. Third cousin, didn't you see her behavior just now? Will Deputy Prime Minister's mansion accept such a woman who has no sisterhood and hits others when they are down? Gu Shimei wiped her tears angrily and cried. He vented all his resentment on Qin Wanru, who had already left. All right, cousin. There's no such thing. Don't talk nonsense and ruin our reputation. We didn't hear what they said just now. Maybe second Miss Qin is speaking for elder sister Qin. Does she want to help first Miss Qin fight back? When Shiqi comforted her in a soft voice, but his smile became thinner. Third cousin, you actually speak for her. I'm going to tell uncle. Gu Shishu stamped her feet angrily, covered her face with a handkerchief, and ran away in tears. The servant girl followed closely behind her. When Shiqi didn't chase after her. He still stood where he was, but his smile was much colder. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Gu Shishu's back thoughtfully. There was only suspicion in his eyes, without any affection. There were some things that he couldn't think about. The more he thought about it, the more likely it was. If Gu Shishu was really what he thought, he would make her lose everything with his own hands one day. Third young master, cousin Miss is crying. Do you want to go and coax her? The servant reminded him beside him. When Shiqi shook his head and walked slowly in the opposite direction of Gu Shishu. Prime Minister and Madam will be unhappy. The servant followed him and reminded him. Although this cousin Miss was not the Prime Minister's biological daughter, now that the Prime Minister's biological daughter was gone, the Prime Minister and his wife would probably feel more sorry for her than the three young masters. Let them be. She is just a cousin who is temporarily raised in our mansion. I heard that my uncle is going back to the capital city. At that time, she will go back to her own mansion. When Shiqi said indifferently, as if he was talking about someone else's cousin. His eyes were as calm as water. The servant was anxious. Prime Minister and Madam will be reluctant. No matter how reluctant they are, she is someone else's daughter. Can they raise her in our mansion all the time? When Shiqi said indifferently. I heard. The servant hesitated for a moment. Say it. When Shichi said gently. Seeing his gentle attitude, the servant dared to say, I heard from others that cousin Miss is going to marry third young master. These words made Wen Shichi stop and frown. The people in our mansion actually spread such a rumor. It seemed that he had to pay more attention to the affairs of his mansion. Isn't she going to marry second brother? Second brother is older than me, so he should be engaged earlier. But I heard, cousin Miss told madam that she has a good impression of third young master. Besides, everyone in our mansion can see that cousin Miss is obedient to third young master. The servant murmured. He should not have said such gossip about his master. Now that when Shichi asked, he dared to say a few words. Where did you hear the news? When Shichi continued to walk. What did Gu Shishu say to my mother? Such words can't be spread out casually. My mother's family is strict, so the people around her don't dare to talk about it. After all, this kind of thing will also ruin Gu Shishu's reputation. Then it can only be Gu Shishu. I heard it from cousin Mrs. personal servant girl. The servant didn't dare to lie, so he lowered his head and said. When Shichi's eyes turned cold, and there was a hint of coldness on his gentle face. He ordered, from now on, if cousin Miss has anything to say, just tell me directly. Remember, I'm your master. Tell me everything cousin Miss does to me word by word. His words were extremely strict. The servant was scared and hurriedly nodded, thinking that he was wrong in the past. He thought that his master also liked cousin Miss, but he didn't expect that his master didn't like cousin Miss at all. When Shichi said as he walked forward. Unconsciously, he walked to a courtyard in front of him. Seeing this spacious courtyard, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He actually walked into the courtyard where the former heir of Duke Xing lived. It turned out that he really wanted to see the screen wall left by the former heir of Duke Xing's writing. Gu Shishu really knew what he wanted. It seemed that he needed to pay more attention to Gu Shishu in the future. She knew his preferences so well. Third young master, shall we go in? The servant looked at Wen Shichi, who stood still, and then looked at the tall and deserted courtyard, and asked in confusion. Let's take a look first. Wen Shichi said. It was impolite to enter someone else's courtyard without the permission of the owner, especially since this was the former residence of the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion. It was said that this name was a taboo in Duke Xing's mansion. But the screen wall inside inexplicably attracted Wen Shichi. A woman's voice suddenly came to his ears. Wen Shichi looked around and hid behind a big tree. The manservant cleverly followed him. Seeing two servant girls coming over from a distance, they should be from Duke Xing's mansion. But at this time, the two servant girls didn't serve in the front but came here, which made him feel suspicious. Sister, do we really want to paint the screen wall? A servant girl in red said, and both of them carried an ink bucket in their hands. Old madam said that it will remind us of it when we look at it, so we simply paint it. Since it is madam's order, we will do it. The other servant girl in purple, who looked older, said in a low voice. When they arrived at the gate of the courtyard, the gate was not closed. The two servant girls were a little tired, so they slightly pushed the gate open, put down the buckets, and took a rest. Why do you paint it now? Don't they all say that the characters on this screen wall are very beautiful? Besides, old madam has never come to see it. Why does she feel annoyed when she sees it? The servant girl in red said in confusion. Everyone in the mansion knew that this was the residence of the former heir of Duke Xing, and it was a place where no one was allowed to come in casually. An old maid had entered this place by mistake and was beaten half to death. It could be seen that this was not a place where anyone could come in casually. Such a screen wall was not something that anyone could see at will. As for the master of this mansion, except for Master Hao, who used to sneak here to play in the past, no one would come here. It was really strange that old madam used such a reason to talk about it. The servant girl was still young, and there was no one here, so she couldn't bear to say this. Who knows what the masters think? We just do as they say. The servant girl in purple said. But if Master Hao comes back, he will make trouble, right? What should we do then? The servant girl in red was very worried. Master Hao was a devil incarnate. If he knew that her father's screen wall had been painted, it would be troublesome. It has nothing to do with us. Besides, Master Hao is now living in Rui, and great elder princess's mansion, and it is unlikely that he will come back. Even if he comes back occasionally, he will not immediately think of this screen wall. The servant girl in purple thought for a while and said, Will he really be fine? The servant girl in red was a little scared. She had seen Master Hao make trouble. Not only did he make trouble in the whole mansion, but some servant girls and old maids were also beaten, and some were tied up and sold. Seeing that the servant girl in red was so scared, the servant girl in purple also hesitated and finally felt guilty. It was them who painted the screen wall. In the end, they wouldn't push the blame to them, would they? How could they bear this responsibility as servant girls? The two of them looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Someone from Rui and great elder princess's mansion came to send gifts today, right? Why don't we secretly send a message? If the people from Rui and great elder princess's mansion don't say anything, we will paint the screen wall. Anyway, Madam only said to paint the screen wall, but she didn't limit our time. The servant girl in purple suggested helplessly. Okay, sister, let's do it secretly. The two servant girls left immediately. They put the ink bucket aside and left in a hurry. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.